Friday, July 15th, 2016, day 297. I returned for the rematch after about 6 months of preparation. I knew he had some preparation. Now that I had some myself, I could look back and say he had a solid but unremarkable skill set. It was more than enough to beat Sam 1.0, but the new and improved Sam was going to take his lunch money and drive him home to his mom. During this time, I managed to get a few fleeting rematches, primarily with the garden hose. Most of my other attempts felt like pranks. Since serious retaliation was beyond me, I mostly pestered Julie and her lover in ways I found amusing. One day I arranged for Dr. Dick's wife to meet me and caught them engaged in an activity together. It wasn't a bad show, but in the end, it proved too real for me. I didn't want a serious confrontation. It just brought me back to depression. While I was in the time loop, I couldn't get over my wife. I couldn't move on with my life. No, for my own peace of mind, I couldn't afford to wallow in my worries about my failed marriage day after day. So when I interrupted my wife's afternoon rest, it was usually accompanied by juvenile antics designed to make me laugh at their expense. But not today. Today I was serious. I briefly contemplated distracting Julie. A neighbor 2 houses down had a baby. They used cloth diapers and paid a service to pick up the soiled ones and clean them every couple of days. A face full of dirty diapers might have kept her from interfering. I was beginning to think I had an obsession with throwing shit in my wife's face. I must have unresolved issues. In the end, I didn't do anything. Figured if I looked like I was holding my own against Peters, she wouldn't interfere. If she grabbed him again, I wouldn't hit him. I wanted a fair fight. If, however, she grabbed me, well, if there was any upside to the first fight, it showed that I could take a punch. I walked into the house, giving the lovers some time to gather themselves. I'd been down this road many times before. Dr. Dick was there, drugging my wife. I cleared my throat loudly. They froze for a second, and then Julie started climbing, trying to get out from under Peters. She looked at me like I was a ghost and made whimpering noises. Tears were already streaming down her cheeks. I knew from experience that we could stand like that, looking at each other, for several minutes if I didn't say anything. Julie never resorted to old platitudes like, things aren't what they seem, or it doesn't mean anything. All of her frantic phrases boiled down to saying, I'm sorry, over and over again. But I didn't come here to apologize. Dr. Dick was standing at the foot of the bed, between my wife and me and to her side. He was very calm, probably not wanting to escalate the situation. That's exactly what I was trying to do. I wasn't attacking him, so he wasn't defending himself. I needed a fight. I needed his anger. A large lump of phlegm and saliva formed on my way to the bedroom. I calmly stepped forward and spit in his face. He was stunned for a couple seconds, and then he growled and lunged at me. Peters threw a hard right punch. Earlier, I would have tried to block the blow or dodge it. Now, however, I used my footwork to avoid it. Step back, step forward. As I stepped back, Peters's punch whistled past my nose. Step forward, and I drove my fist into his stomach. Dr. Dick backed up, hunched over. Peters was in pain. I think he would have tried to call a truce if I'd shown the slightest sign of weakening. He was clearly training at some mixed martial arts gym. He kept trying to get in close and grapple with me to negate my size advantage. In hindsight, I may have trained too long and too hard for this fight. I envisioned a battle royal and got a pillow fight. I thought this fight would be cathartic, but Peters was a much bigger ordeal in my mind than he was in real life. I was ready to call it a day. I let Dr. Dick move some distance away and didn't pursue him. I watched him shuffle his feet. Even from our first fight, I knew he liked to kick. So far, he hadn't had a chance, not enough space. But now he was ready to try his hand. Despite what Carl Douglas said, everyone is not a kung fu fighter. A lot of bad things can happen if you get caught by your leg in midair. It takes a hell of a fighter to dodge a leg kick against someone who knows what they're doing. Julie was still sitting on the bed, her widened eyes darting back and forth between me and the slumped figure of Dr. Dick. She must have been wondering when her husband had turned into Bruce Lee. Instinct told me to make a joke about it. I spent 7 years trying to make her laugh, but not anymore. I did what I came to do. I managed to take 2 steps down the stairs before she started yelling at me to wait, but like I said, I didn't need her apology. Friday, July 15th, 2016 day, 7:08. Kicking Dr. Dick's ass was an anticlimax. I was glad I did it, but realized that the journey was more important than the goal. And I won't bore you with the details of how I spent each day in the time loop. I used to spend a lot of time entertaining myself. Taking martial arts classes taught me that I got a lot more enjoyment out of trying to better myself. I read a lot. I tried to learn an instrument but found that I had no musical ear. I could hum a tune, but I couldn't distinguish one note from another. I studied new languages, which it turned out I had a talent for. In addition to language programs, you could find just about any immigrant group in New York City and immerse yourself in a language. I learned French, Spanish, and German. But the first language I learned was one I wouldn't have shown any interest in before I got in the loop: Korean. I continued to spend a lot of time at Sung's dojo. Sung didn't speak English well, but after I was able to communicate with him in his native language, he became much more open. Plus, Sung had a sister, Mi Suk, a stone fox, and she didn't speak English at all. That's how it seemed to me. I was already considering making a move on her. She met all my requirements in terms of physical attractiveness, but once I was able to speak to her in Korean, she could no longer ignore me so easily. I found out that she knew English, she just didn't like me for some reason. But I was still glad I learned the language. I read books on a wide variety of subjects. If I ever got out of the loop, I would be a real Renaissance man. Every once in a while, I'd carve out a day to have a little fun. I spent almost $200,000 to organize an impromptu street festival in Central Park. I had tables, chairs, and a few booths with temporary workers handing out refreshments. A giant banner read, "Happy National Tapioca Pudding Day." I stood on a small stage surrounded by 8-foot stacks of pudding cups. I used a mouthpiece so the masses could hear my message. Today, on this greatest of days, National Tapioca Pudding Day, please come up and get your free pudding. Come one, come all, free pudding. I started with a U-Haul truck full of pudding and several wholesale suppliers to deliver it within a day. It cost an arm and a leg to collect that much pudding and deliver it in a day. I had dancers in revealing outfits and a DJ. Girls in bikinis played in kiddie pools filled with pudding, actually water with cornstarch and food coloring. The police shut me down a couple hours later before I could throw away the extra pudding. "Sir, do you have a permit for all of this?" Believe me, I tried. But the city moves too slowly, and the pudding waits for no one. We need you to close up and clean up after yourselves. You can't serve food without a license. It's pre-packaged pudding. It doesn't even need to be refrigerated. The officer didn't like me arguing with him. "Sir, you're already facing a hefty fine. Don't make me ask you again. Lock it up." I nodded as if I was going to do that, then returned to the stage. "People, this man wants to take your pudding. This day will never end if you don't eat your pudding. Power to the pudding. Power to the pudding." New Yorkers love a good show. About 50 people picked up my chant of "Power to the pudding" as I jumped off the stage and ran from the cops. I grabbed an armful of pudding cups off one of the tables and started throwing them to those who didn't have any until the cops grabbed me. I spent the rest of the day in jail. The pudding gods were not appeased. The next day, a Broadway makeup artist put a wig on me with long, messy hair and a false beard on my chin. I then went to the store and bought a mismatched set of shabby clothes. After getting myself properly dressed, I went to an open mic night at a hipster bar in Chelsea. I'd like to read a poem by a personal hero of mine. He was a doctor, a man of science, but his words touch my soul, speak to my inner child. I cleared my throat. 1 fish, 2 fish, a red fish, blue fish. I was forced to reevaluate the hipsters. They let me finish and didn't take offense. They actually laughed with me when I came to laugh at them. I felt a little healed. But I still repeated it a few more times at other hipster hangouts. Thanks to their sense of humor, it was even more fun than I expected. I mostly talked to people. I was a bit shy as a kid, and as an adult, I didn't have many friends. I still don't have any now. All of my friends were mutual with Julie, and I knew that most of them, if not all of them, were aware that Julie was cuckolded with me. I wasn't close enough to any of them to take a survey, and I wouldn't want any more ties to this crowd regardless. So I set out in search of new friends. I couldn't make many friendships in one day, but I could be on the lookout for good candidates. People I would make an effort to include in my life if I broke out of the time loop. Sleep topped that list. But there were a few other people I'd gotten to know and bonded with. Of course, to them, I was a stranger. Being a perpetual stranger to people I'd met dozens, if not hundreds of times, was sometimes exhausting. Sometimes I was tempted to go back to my wife for some affection. I managed to push that thought away by coming up with a new plan. My parents had given birth to me late in life and were now living in retirement in Florida. A 3-hour flight, and I was in the bosom of unconditional love. I was also dating. There was no real relationship, but I could use dating apps and go to clubs. I was forced into relationships that I had avoided in college, but I thought I may have been too picky. I had a few one-night stands and also went to call girls occasionally. More often, I had strictly platonic dates with women who weren't ready to get into bed right away. I thought some of them might be suitable for a relationship, but it's hard to tell when you can't get past the first impression. I had several conversations with my wife. I questioned whether I should even talk to her at all. I knew her innermost thoughts and feelings by reading her diary. She would never be as honest with me as she was in her diary. I knew exactly why she was cheating, and I knew exactly what she thought of me. The two concepts were contradictory. The fact that she was serially cheating in no way matched how much she loved me. And yet I felt I had to give her a chance. Maybe getting caught would make her see things differently. I talked to her several times. I won't bore you with all her guilty talk. She begged a lot and promised never to fornicate again if I gave her another chance. Really, I only had a couple of questions for her. I'll tell you about how our last conversation ended. Julie and I were in the living room, she on the couch, me in a chair. She was mostly crying. I had to let her work the tissues before I could get a coherent sentence out of her. As I thought, she never lied to me, but she also wouldn't give me details unless I pulled them out of her. I had to clarify that I knew Peters wasn't the first. It was always a shock to her. So tell me, Julie, why did you cheat on me? Oh my God, Sam, Dr. Peters, I won't say he seduced me, but he's a very strong-willed man. I know that's no excuse. I don't have a good reason. Nothing to justify my behavior. All of this was true, but it didn't allow the more important question to come up. What about all the men before Peters? Julie turned white. She was momentarily at a loss for words as her hopes of reconciliation went down the drain. She didn't go into denial. Did someone tell you? Who would have told me, Julie? How many of our friends know? How many people think I'm a laughingstock because of you? No one is laughing at you, she muttered. No one. Everyone loves you, Sam. They wouldn't laugh at you. Some of them know. I've been caught before. But that reflects on me, not you, baby. Really? I asked. That's a good point, but it's not off the table. No one let me know. They stayed friends with you even though they knew you were a two-faced bitch. How could they respect me? I'm an outsider. You all have a secret and the only one not privy to it is me. Do they love me? Bullshit. Julie flinched at being called a bitch. I'd called her worse before, but she wasn't used to my contempt. Again, there was a long silence. This one was 1 part conversation and 3 parts navel gaze. Sam, I understand what you're saying. I never thought of it that way. I just know that none of our friends have ever said anything bad about you. I'm sorry. Sorry if my actions hurt your relationship with them. But if none of them told you, how did you know there were others? First, how I knew is irrelevant. Second, you're evasive. Why? Julie sighed. I'm not trying to avoid answering. I just don't know what to say. I've been thinking about it. I think the real answer is because I could. Because I never thought I'd get caught. I thought I could have fun without hurting you. It wasn't anywhere in her journal, but it was true. At least it was now. But I figured she'd never tell me why she'd started if she had a choice in the matter. I read your diary. Julie jumped up and ran to the bathroom. I could hear her emptying her stomach in there. It was about 20 minutes before she was able to pull herself together and go back into the living room. I thought she'd burst into tears, but she must have held a few tears in reserve. I'm so sorry. I can't, I don't know how to. She fell silent. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Are you still saying that no one laughed at me? So, you couldn't wind up with me, huh? I'm not a match? No, I mean, yes, you're a match. I just thought I needed more. I was young and foolish. And then, when I didn't get caught, she took a deep breath. Sam, you really do satisfy me. If, if you've read my diary, you should know that this is no longer an excuse. This has never been an excuse, I shouted, pounding my fist on the coffee table. I shattered the glass top and cut my hand. I just leaned back in my chair and pressed my hand into the armrest. It'll heal. Julie jumped up. Is there, is there really no hope? I love you like I've never loved anyone before. I'm going to change. I'll never do it again, she whimpered. Do you think you can ever forgive me? Give me another chance? Could she change? I thought she probably could. But I could never forget what she'd done to me. If an enemy hurt me like that, I'd probably kill him. Of course, an enemy could never hurt me like that, only someone you let into your heart. Once you let him in, you have to trust him. I can never open up to Julie like that again. No, there is no us anymore. I believe you love me, Julie, but you're wrong. You love yourself more. You didn't love me enough to put me first. You didn't love me enough to be patient with me, to deny yourself pleasure. All you had to do was wait, or better yet, help me. You're a very shallow woman, Julie. I only wish I'd seen it sooner. Goodbye, Julie. Even in my most intense anger, I never got physical with Julie. I was tempted, a very strong temptation. I could have done it and gotten away with it. But I didn't for two reasons. First, I still didn't know how the time loop worked. I knew I was reliving the same day over and over again. But no one else had done it. One of my early theories was that maybe there are multiple dimensions. Could it be that I am a nodal point from which multiple futures branch off? Could my actions have consequences for others, even if not for me? I didn't know. But I didn't want to hurt someone for fun if there was even a chance that they might have to live with the consequences. But the likelihood of that was very slim. The second and far more important reason I never hurt Julie was that I just didn't want to be that guy. My father liked to paraphrase a quote by the playwright Sigmund Miller. Real character is what you do when no one is looking. I didn't have to let my base nature override my morals just because I could do things without consequences. I needed to rein myself in, especially because I was getting away with it. I don't know if karma exists, but I believe that certain things taint a person. Besides, torturing Julie won't help me forget her. I'd be happier if I could forget her and keep my blindfold on. I even stopped coming home with a water hose. I had no choice but to wake up every morning 20 feet away from my wife, but one day I looked around and realized I hadn't seen her in over a year. Friday, July 15th, 2016 day, 1382. I am ashamed that it took me so long to understand the nature of the time loop. Or maybe it's not about the nature. I still haven't figured it out. But perhaps the mechanism of its operation. I slept most of the night. Sounds simple, but I didn't need it. Every morning I woke up with the same energy and level of rest, no matter what I did or how late I went to bed the night before. That is, I didn't need to sleep, ever. But I slept anyway. Going to bed at the end of the day just felt natural, and even if I couldn't notice a difference the next day, I just felt rested. As time went on, I started sleeping less. As I made the effort to go on dates and make friends, starting over became increasingly unprofitable. New York is the city that never sleeps, so I could easily spend every hour of every day meeting and socializing with new people. From the beginning of my time in the loop, I would sometimes stay up late into the night. I thought my day ended at 5 in the morning, and I woke up at 5 in the morning on Friday. But as I started staying up more often, I noticed something. Or rather, two things. First, my day wasn't ending at 5 a.m. It was actually resetting at 4:58 and 26 seconds. It was so close that I never noticed. I didn't know what that meant, but I felt it was important. Second, if I didn't fall asleep, my day would end at 4:58 with a flash of light. This I noticed shortly after entering the loop, but didn't pay much attention to it. It was really fast. So fast that it was more of an impression of light than actual light. I figured it was just a trick of my mind as I went from walking around to suddenly waking up in bed. You have to realize that 99 days out of 100 I spent in New York City. If you could spend every day in the Big Apple or Trenton, NJ, which would you choose? So, this was one of the rare days spent in Trenton. I bought a novel at Barnes& Noble. I wanted to finish it that evening so I wouldn't have to buy it again the next day. As usual, I ended the day at the hotel. I finished the novel and looked at my phone to check the time. 4:53. There was no point in trying to sleep. I watched the time go to reset and woke up the next morning. There was no flashback. What the hell? By now, I had gotten used to thinking of the flash of light as a normal occurrence. Its absence nearly drove me out of my mind. I stayed in Trenton again that day and still no flash. Okay, time to experiment. I went back to New York and stayed up. There was the flash again. Now I was totally confused. I thought the flash was part of my time loop, but now it seemed somehow connected to New York. It had become the center point of my day. I was just killing time to get to 4:58 a.m. and 26 seconds. I was moving around trying to figure out the significance of my location. I saw the flash no matter where I was in New York City, in the Five Barrows neighborhood. But the farther I got away from Manhattan, the dimmer it seemed. In New Jersey, I didn't see her at all. The problem was that I still spent my days indoors. I was either at a hotel if I was alone, or at a club or bar if I was with others. One evening, I decided to go outside at the end of the day. That made a difference. The flash still only lasted a fraction of a second, but once outside, I could definitely tell by now that it had some direction. I got back to Trenton and was sitting in the courtyard of my hotel at 4:58. I wasn't expecting to see anything, but there it was. Very faint, from the north. I only saw it because I wasn't inside. The next night, I rented a penthouse suite in the tallest hotel in Trenton. At 4:58, I stood on the balcony and looked out toward New York City. Friday, July 15th, 2016. Day 1403. I slowly sat up in bed. I finally recognized what happens every day at 4:58 minutes and 26 seconds. It all happened quickly, in a split second. It was so fast it was more of an impression than a memory. But I knew what I saw. A mushroom cloud. I may have been the first person to ever cry tears of joy at the sight of a nuclear explosion. It was immediately clear to me that the explosion and my time loop were connected. I had never considered that something external was triggering my daily reset. But now there was no doubt. A little research on the internet confirmed my thoughts. Even the largest nuclear bombs ever built would not have a blast radius reaching Trenton from New York City. Depending on the wind, Trenton might get hit by the fallout, but it wouldn't kill me instantly. So if the explosion itself didn't kill me every day, why did I reset the moment it hit? The time loop had to be directly related to the bomb. What made me cry with happiness was that there was an obvious way to avoid the time loop, stop the nuclear bomb from exploding. I immediately began to investigate. First, I rented a helicopter. In fact, I booked a charter flight from Trenton to New York. The charter thought I was just an early arriving VIP. I timed the flight so that we would be 5 miles from New York City at the appointed time. At 4:55, I signaled the pilot on the intercom. I gave him a big tip before the flight and told him I might want to do some sightseeing on the way out. Would you mind hovering here for a few minutes? And turn around a bit so I can get a good look at the city. No problem, sir. Let me know when you're ready to continue. We were about to be knocked out of the sky, but he didn't need to know that. He'd be fine tomorrow. When the bomb went off, I was ready. I had a much better view this time, but it was still blindingly fast. I wasn't looking at the mushroom cloud itself. I was looking at the ground, trying to find where it had started from. By the time I realized I was looking in the wrong place, I was already awake the next morning. I repeated this process 3 more times until I reached eastern Manhattan. This was the closest I could get to detecting ground zero using this method. The closer I got, the more overwhelmed my senses became. This was the easiest part. Finding the exact location proved to be much more difficult. At ground level, or even from the air, it was impossible to discern anything inside the blast radius. Standing in New Jersey, I could tell the blast was coming from the north. Standing in Manhattan, I couldn't make out a damn thing. The blast was coming from all around me. My aerial reconnaissance told me the explosion was on the east side of the island, but it was still a hell of a huge haystack to find the needle. If the bomb was detonated remotely, it could have been anywhere. I'd have to search building after building and room after room. I'd have to look in every car, dumpster, and basement in Manhattan. I would have done that, but it was a last resort. I was going to work on the theory that if I found the place, there would be some indication. I assumed it was the work of terrorists. While a foreign government could bomb New York City from a distance, the terrorists would have boots on the ground. To find ground zero, I started with the most likely targets of terrorism. I wandered the nighttime streets of Manhattan, looking for anything unusual or suspicious. The most likely target seemed to me to be the United Nations building. I spent all day there and watched it into the night. It was a big place, and it would probably take me several nights to watch it from all sides, but I gave up after one. There were too many guards there. I couldn't imagine anyone trying to sneak a nuclear warhead onto the grounds. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just hoped I'd realize it when I saw it. Every night I searched a different neighborhood. Times Square, Carnegie Hall, Rockefeller Center, the Empire State Building, the World Trade Center Memorial. I went to colleges, museums, and the offices of major companies. I spent weeks combing through Central Park. I searched for months before I found something interesting. Friday, July 15th, 2016 day, 15:31. It was getting close to 4 in the morning, and I was walking west on 57th Street. I crossed Park Avenue and came upon a roadblock. The street was blocked by wooden barriers. I looked both ways. I could barely make out another roadblock on 58th. 56th was clear. Looking straight ahead, I saw another barrier on Madison Avenue. I walked over to 57th and looked at Madison. More barriers. The entire block was cordoned off. This is unusual, but not uncommon. There is always some kind of construction going on in New York City, but I didn't see any workers, and the city doesn't usually allow street closures unless there's work going on. Barriers were blocking sidewalks, but New Yorkers generally don't care about pedestrian laws. There were people on the street, but not many at this hour. I walked around the barrier and slowly walked down the street, looking at the surrounding buildings. I was halfway to Madison when I noticed something strange. There were a couple guys in maintenance worker uniforms standing outside the building at 57th and Parkway. At night, janitors and maintenance crews descend on New York City. But these two guys weren't working. They weren't doing anything. They weren't smoking. They weren't talking. They weren't sitting and resting. They just stood there, about 30 feet separating them. If it weren't for their uniforms, they could have been mistaken for guards. In fact, since I stopped and looked at them, they were looking right at me. As I watched, one of them said something, but he seemed to be addressing the air. He raised his head slightly and looked at the building behind him, and I saw some sort of Bluetooth device in his ear. I heard a sound like the sound of a phone book dropping on the table, and then I looked up at the sky. Friday, July 15th, 2016, day 15:32. I've been shot at. The last time I'd been shot at by police officers was during a drug bust. I guessed I was hit by a much larger bullet this time because I died so much faster. Maybe from a rifle. I hoped I had found the place, but I had to be sure. I may have just managed to stumble upon some other crime in progress. Come to think of it, it was a wonder I hadn't been shot or stabbed more often. I explored pretty much every neighborhood in the city with little concern for personal safety. That evening, I was walking down 57th Street again. This time, I made sure I was on the same sidewalk as the fake janitors and the building they appeared to be guarding. The night before, I had made sure they didn't follow pedestrians if they kept moving. They only shot at me when I showed obvious interest in them. Given the time and the barricades, there were only a few people walking on that street. I wondered if my shot had provoked a bloodbath. Well, it wasn't for me, and I'd killed myself about a dozen times during my time in the noose. I only did it after I'd already been killed once and knew I'd be back. I looked at it like hitting the reset button on a video game. I just wanted to quit that day and start over. And that doesn't mean I took it lightly. No, I had to be very depressed to decide to commit suicide. But I've never killed anyone, or even seriously injured anyone. It's just not in my character. So I was a little hesitant about what I was about to do. These people may not have been terrorists, but they were definitely murderers. but I got through it. Tonight I was wearing a large hooded sweatshirt, not my usual attire. I walked a few steps past the first janitor. When I was about halfway between them, I pulled my hands out of my front pocket along with my neighbor's Glock 17. Unless you count shooting directly at your own head, the closest gun experience for me has been paintball, but it's hard to miss from less than 15 feet away. Taking the gun in both hands, I fired twice at the guy in front of me. With my peripheral vision, I saw him start to fall as I turned and fired 2 more shots at the man I had just passed. I was aiming for the center. The first bullet hit him in the chest, but the second one threw him upward and I saw a large wet piece of his neck fly off to the side. For a split second, the sight paralyzed me, and then adrenaline kicked in. Sniper. I hurriedly ducked through the doors leading to the lobby. Just like the day before, I heard a muffled thud and then the sound of a gunshot hitting the concrete where I stood. As soon as the door slammed shut behind me, I groaned. Shooting terrorists seems morally unambiguous, but I wasn't morally prepared for someone to die by my hand. There was a 10-foot corridor in front of the doors that opened into the lobby of the building. I pulled myself together and raised my gun. I had to search this building and find out if there was a bomb in here. I really hope so after shooting 2 people. Up ahead, I could see the lobby. To my right was the elevator bank. Straight ahead was a small cafe, probably to serve coffee to incoming workers, but it was now closed and locked. To the left, the lobby opened up too far for me to see. I figured it was some sort of information desk and/or rest area. I snuck along the left wall and peeked around the corner. Shit. I jerked back with such force that I fell on my back as the corner where I was standing began to collapse under a hail of masonry. A continuous stream of bullets crashed into the walls and floor, accompanied by a sound like the work of a giant bandsaw. As I peered around the corner, I caught a glimpse of the rest of the hall. There were several chairs and couches, and in the center was an information desk. Behind the desk sat another fake janitor, with some sort of massive machine gun behind him. I'm no expert on guns, but it looked like something Rambo would have gotten up. It was mounted on a tripod with an ammunition belt feed. The machine gun was turning the entrance into cheese. I could barely see through the clouds of dust raised by the building's concrete foundation. Stone crumbs sprinkled on me from the granite floor. I had to curl up and protect my head from the flying stones. I was covered in cuts and concrete dust. I must have looked like a jelly donut. The buzzing of the machine gun cut off. He had to change the cartridge belt. I rushed around the corner and shot at him before he could reload, but he didn't. Explosion. Friday, July 15th, 2016. Day 1532. I knew now that I had found the bomb's laying site. It had gone off earlier. My attack must have caused it to go off earlier than they had planned. That could be a problem. But now that I had found what I was looking for, I was in no hurry to go back and attack the building again that night. My idea from the beginning had been to find the bomb and then plan my actions carefully. I prayed that I could stop that explosion and complete the loop. But if the loop ended, I had to be ready. For one thing, guns were banned. New York has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. Saving a few million lives would allow me a lot of forgiveness, but why make it harder on myself? There was no way to legally obtain and carry a gun in New York, no matter how much money I was willing to spend. And not in one day. Although, if I took a gun from one of the terrorists, yeah, that could work. If I brought my own gun into battle, there would be awkward questions. But if I used the one I took from them, I'd be over the moon. The gun problem illustrated a larger issue. If stopping the nuclear bomb caused the time loop to stop, I would be the center of national attention. Heavily armed terrorists were planning to detonate a nuclear weapon in New York City. There would be no hiding it. To be honest, I probably could have prevented the bombing by remaining anonymous. I could have gathered enough information to alert the authorities and let them take care of it. But I didn't for 2 reasons. First, on common sense, the US government would make sure the bomb didn't go off. To hell with collateral damage. How would I feel if they leveled a city block and everyone in it? No, I would take as many attempts as it takes to prevent the loss of innocent lives. And secondly, to hell with it. This was my day. If you take someone down on July 15th, 2016, you'll be dealing with me. As for the fame and worship, well, that was a burden I was willing to carry. I began my exploration by finding out what the heck was in this building. A quick internet search allowed me to find a directory. Most of the building was occupied by small offices, lawyers, accountants, and the like. There was a regional office for a car rental company, some kind of medical consulting business, some vague listings of companies I'd have to look up. But the one that caught my eye the most was the South Korean embassy. It was on the fourth floor and, at first glance, was the only thing in the building that might have symbolic significance to the terrorists. Obviously, New York City itself was the target, but the fact that the bomb was in the same building as the embassy could not have been a coincidence. I followed 57th Street and Park Avenue. The terrorists arrived at 3:15 a.m. They arrived in several construction trucks. The fake janitors, now in fake police uniforms, or real ones, I didn't know, came out and redirected traffic while the others set up barricades. I counted 11 of them. I had to go back several times to look from different angles. There were also 3 hostages there. The terrorists took them with them when they arrived. The hostages had bags put over their heads, and after the street was cleared, they were dragged into the building from the back of one of the trucks. The fake police officers disappeared into the building and reappeared 5 minutes later as attendants. Interestingly, 2 of the terrorists did not enter the building. They crossed the street and entered the high-rise. One of them was carrying a guitar case. This must be the sniper who shot at me. At the beginning of the time loop, I lamented that surveillance was useless in trying to ferret out information about my wife. Now the situation had changed. I needed high-tech, and I had the money to do it. Across the street from the embassy building was a high-rise office building. I bought myself a fake janitor's suit from a uniform company. When the real maintenance crew showed up at midnight, I was already waiting with a bag full of envelopes, each containing $5,000. I pulled a wheeled dumpster out of the trunk of the van I'd rented and went inside with the cleanup crew. This crew wasn't cleaning any offices on the north side of the 4th floor. The closest was the developer's office on the 6th floor. I waited until they finished cleaning and then handed everyone 2 envelopes. Lock the door when you leave and forget you saw me. Left alone, I found a window overlooking the embassy and retrieved my equipment from the trash can. The first was a heavy-duty glass cutter. I cut a 2-foot hole in the window and tossed the glass cutter along with the glass aside. Next, I pulled out a parabolic microphone. It was a commercial model, made for law enforcement and not available to the general public. Fortunately, the company had offices here in New York. I went there with $250,000 in my briefcase and found an employee who was willing to give me one to roll off the back of a truck. Note: I grossly overpaid for everything. I knew I didn't have to pay that much, but man, why not? The parabolic microphone picked up everything the 2 guys outside were saying, as well as Rambo in the lobby. The lights were on the 4th floor, but the curtains were drawn. I pointed the mic at the windows and was able to hear faint conversation. All in all, the parabolic microphone allowed me to eavesdrop on 5 terrorists. Useful, but not enough. I was back in the high-rise dressed as a maintenance worker. I forgo the high-tech gear and carried a pistol. I looked for a sniper team. First, I went up to the roof. It was empty. I looked at the security railing at the edge of the roof and realized why they weren't here. The building was almost 50 stories high. That height made it difficult to take pictures because of the steep angle to the street. I leaned out and looked to the side of the building. I caught a brief glimpse of movement, like the barrel of a rifle poking out of the side of the building and then back in. It appeared to be above the roof of the embassy building, that is, on the 9th or 10th floor. After taking the elevator to the 12th floor, I used the stairs to search from the 11th floor down. I was on the 9th, approaching the door of the marketing firm. Behind me, I heard a creaking sound. A soft thud accompanied the bullet in my back. Well, the guy with the sniper was obviously there to keep the likes of me from sneaking up on him. I couldn't see where he was coming from, but now that I knew he was there, he was easy enough to find. The watcher was in an office with a good view of the elevators and stairwells. There was no way for me to sneak up on him. On the 3rd try, I figured out how to get close to him. Once on the landing, I immediately turned right, walked down the corridor and out of sight of the observer. I hid in an alcove behind a coffee machine and waited. He walked down the hallway, looking in every office. He had to check what was behind the coffee machine. When he was next to me, I stepped out and poked him in the back with my gun. Thump! Thump! His body muffled the gunshots, but I didn't know if he radioed when he saw me. I might not have much time. I searched him quickly. He had no identification. His pockets were empty except for ammo, a knife, and a spare pistol. But what I needed most was his walkie-talkie. He had an earpiece and a small microphone attached to his shirt collar. Wires ran from them to a tube strapped to his belt. I found the label Ultralux, but no dials or numerical readouts to tell me what frequency they were using. There was a faint noise coming from the earpiece. Someone was trying to contact the observer. He must have reported me. Flash. The next morning I looked for Ultralux radios. They were high-end encrypted two-way radios. I found a dealer who sold them in Queens and asked him to show me how it worked. The back cover came off, exposing a digital frequency display with up and down arrows and 10 knobs that controlled the encryption. I went back to the high-rise. Trying to buy some more time, I tried another ambush on the adjuster. The first time, I only had about 5 minutes to search him before his buddies detonated the nuke. He must have called me extremely suspicious, and when he didn't answer them, it was over. And since I knew where the sniper team would be, I just got there first, hid, and waited. That worked out much better. I had a full 15 minutes to frantically memorize the encryption code in the adjuster's radio before the sniper came for him. They barely had time to set up in that building. I guess the sniper didn't even think about the fact that they might be under attack. He just walked into the office where his partner was keeping watch, with his gun holstered. Jorge, where are you? You're not answering. He abruptly interrupted, seeing Jorge's body on the floor and then my gun pointed at him. I fired twice. Now we're even, asshole. The two terrorists were now disabled. I didn't have much time left. I redoubled my efforts to memorize the encryption code. 10 deals, 20. Unfortunately, they weren't lazy, there were no repeats. I repeated the code to myself as I got out of bed and typed it into the notepad on my phone. I now had access to the terrorists' communications. I spent the next 2 weeks listening, compiling a chronology of events. I tracked every move and every conversation of all 11 bad guys. I was able to get a complete picture of what was going on. Maybe I shouldn't admit it, but when I first realized New York was being bombed, I expected to be fighting Arabs. I know, profiling, blah, blah, blah. But that's actually where the smart money was made. Turns out the target was the South Korean embassy, which made a correction to the idea. But all the terrorists I saw were confusing. They were mostly Hispanic, with a couple whites and one black. These guys seemed too inclusive to be fundamentalists. There were actually two groups, terrorists and mercenaries. 7 of them, including everyone I'd seen up to that point, were soldiers for hire. They didn't know about the nuclear bomb. They thought they were a mercenary force in a dispute between North and South Korea. The plan, as far as they knew, was to kidnap the South Korean ambassador and his family. They were then to bring the hostages to the embassy, which was symbolic, and stand guard while the North Koreans did their thing. They were distributed as follows. The sniper and his adjuster were mercenaries, as were 2 observers outside the building, a guard in the lobby, and 2 more on the 4th floor. Of the North Koreans, 1 directed the action from the security office in the lobby, and 3 others were in the ambassador's office on the 4th floor. The mercenaries knew the North Koreans had a bomb, but did not know it was nuclear. They expected to get paid, not die. The North Koreans had several large metal boxes of equipment. They told the mercenaries that it was movie equipment and a bomb big enough to level a building. They would film the destruction of the ambassador and his family, then retreat to a safe distance and blow up the building, a symbol of South Korea's collusion with America. All of this was true, except the ending. The 4 North Koreans knew it was a one-way trip. The North Koreans' goal was simple, to strike at the evil United States and its South Korean associates. The nuclear bomb had to go off. Everything else was secondary. They would detonate it at any hint that something was wrong. Sirens? Detonation. Gun battle sounds? Detonation. Someone doesn't answer their radio for a long time? Detonation. If I hadn't interrupted them, the terrorists would have spent a little over an hour on the ambassador and his family, interspersed with insane rants into the video cameras they'd set up. Then they would have blown themselves up along with the city. Yes, they filmed themselves, but they didn't broadcast. Recordings were kept but not broadcast to anyone. They were afraid the NSA would intercept anything they sent over the internet. I don't know how likely that is, but they didn't want to risk an airstrike if the government found out about them. Instead, their plan was to upload the videotape to their compatriots just before the nuke went off, giving no one time to react. Their allies would then broadcast their manifesto and take credit for the aftermath. Speaking of the terrorists' allies, they claimed to be an independent group of North Korean patriots, in no way affiliated with the government. I said that's nonsense. Every other sentence in their rant was to praise their godlike dictator. In my personal opinion, they were just trying to muddy the waters. It was hard to imagine how an independent group from impoverished North Korea could get their hands on a nuclear bomb. But that wasn't my problem. I just had to deal with these assholes. The biggest problem was that the terrorists had itchy fingers. Any prolonged attack would have set off the bomb. The 3 North Koreans, the hostages, and the nuke were in the ambassador's office. I could hide somewhere that would allow me to track them without going through their security services. But there remained a 4th North Korean who was in the security office on the 1st floor. He could detonate from there, and he would detonate if he lost contact with his buddies. There was no way to defuse the nuke. I'm not MacGyver. Besides, even if the bomb didn't go off, I didn't want to be in a situation where I was surrounded by villains. My goal was to stop the nuke, but I also had a few self-serving goals. First, not to die. If stopping the bomb resulted in the end of the time loop, then any injuries I sustained would carry over to Saturday. It would be very unpleasant if I was killed just as I was ready to go out. So if I get shot, let them blow me up and try again. Second, I will do everything I can to minimize collateral damage. If an innocent person dies in the attack, like the ambassador's daughter, let them set fire to it and try again. Third, I would come out of this situation smelling like roses. If it worked, I'd be a celebrity. Like that guy Sully who landed the plane in the Potomac, only 1,000 times bigger. Women would be lining up. I'd never have to pay for food again. But there would also be intense scrutiny of the events leading up to the, hopefully, failed bombing attempt. I had to plan carefully to avoid awkward questions. For example, if I hid somewhere in the building, how would I explain it later? Was I at the embassy earlier and fell asleep in a closet? I don't think so. I've come to a conclusion. I'm going to need help. If I had enough time, I could figure out how to do it myself. But that could take years, and it wasn't necessary. Why do it alone if you don't have to? Having at least one helper would have simplified things exponentially. The first person I approached was Sung. Sung was South Korean, and I considered him my best friend. He was the obvious choice, and no, this strange coincidence didn't go unnoticed by me. Plus, his background made him the perfect partner for what I had in mind. Sun had briefly been a soldier before losing an eye in combat and being medically discharged. No, he wasn't some kind of super soldier. In fact, he admitted to me that he wasn't a very good shot even before he lost his eye. He excelled in unarmed combat, but there is no room for that in the modern army. After demobilization, Sung worked as a translator. One thing we had in common was a gift for languages. He spoke most Eastern languages fluently. He mostly worked for South Korean technology companies, translating when they dealt with Chinese and Japanese counterparts. Actually, there was a real tough girl in Song's dojutsu, his sister Misuk. Misuk was the reason he and his brother had moved to New York. In South Korea, she was some kind of commando. I don't know if she was a military or government agent, she didn't say. She worked closely with the Americans, participated in joint military exercises. She didn't give any details, saying it was classified information. All she said was that both of our governments screwed her over and she had to leave South Korea with her brother to avoid reprisals from the North. During my time in the noose, I confessed to Song many times. By convincing him that I was in the time loop, I had largely forced him to tell me about his and his sister's past. But that wasn't why I told him about the loop. I just needed to confide in someone sometimes. He probably felt sorry for me when I told him I considered him my best friend. I never let Misuk in on my secrets, but now I've managed to do it. She will be very helpful in stopping the terrorists. So that made 3 of us, but I was going to add one more. My wife. On this point, I had a lot of doubts. Julie obviously didn't have any special skills to bring to bear when attacking nuclear terrorists. She didn't know how to fight. She had never fired a gun. She was not particularly tech-savvy. But my wife had one virtue, and it was by far the most important one for this mission. I could trust her. Wait a minute. I know what you're going to say. Trust her? Are you kidding me? That woman betrayed me. She led a double life behind my back. She humiliated me. But while I will never trust her with my heart again, I can absolutely trust her with my life. She loved me in her own way. I was sure of it. She would follow directions, she would have my back, and most importantly, I believed she would trust me. Probably the biggest danger in this whole endeavor was that one of my assistants might go off script. What if I got shot? What if the people with me had a chance to stop the bomb? I'd be totally screwed if they managed to prevent the explosion and I lay there dying. If something went wrong, I needed the bomb to explode and drop the cycle. Even Sung and Mi-suk could only be trusted to the last minute. I had to be careful not to put them in a position where they could screw me over. It was one thing to believe that I was stuck in a time loop. It's quite another to let myself and all of New York die in a nuclear inferno on my orders. They would let me die if it meant saving the city. I couldn't blame them for that. It would be the right thing to do. But I had as much opportunity as I needed to do the right thing, and I couldn't let someone else screw it up for me. I was sure I could trust my wife in this instance. If there was anyone in the world who loved me and trusted me enough to confide in me completely, it was Julie. Maybe my parents. But they were in Florida, so Julie became the fourth member of my team. We made over 20 attempts to take out terrorists. That may seem like a low success rate, but we probably could have stopped a nuclear bomb in the first few attempts. I was prepared to call the whole thing off if any of us got hurt. As I expected, Song and Mi-suk were in no mood to give up. We'd have to make a mess of things and let the terrorists deal with their itchy fingers themselves. I viewed all these first attempts as experience, watching how the mercenaries and North Koreans reacted to various tactics. What would make them explode? That was the big question. It took some trial and error to figure it out. I was more confident than ever that if I called in the cavalry, they would just launch an airstrike on the building. The government must know the dangers of a direct assault. They would never take that risk. From our failed attempts, I realized how much Julie cared about me. It was on the fourth attempt. Julie's duties boiled down to one thing: sneak up on one terrorist and destroy him. She couldn't use a weapon to do it, but she had a tire iron and the element of surprise. The problem was that Julie was not a violent person. She understood the gravity of the situation and was willing to do her part, but she found it very difficult to walk up to a stranger and crack his skull. Half of my instructions to her boiled down to hit him as hard as you can, because she would have failed if I hadn't made her realize how important it was. During our fourth attack, she didn't hit him hard enough. I entered the room just as he was getting behind her. The gun was already in his hand. By then, I had already armed myself with one of the mercenaries' pistols, so he aimed it at me. Julie saw my eyes widen and instinctively realized what was happening. She jumped forward and pounced on me just as the terrorist fired. I felt her body pressed against me, jerk as the bullets hit it. I raised my gun and opened fire around her. I emptied my clip into it. I squeezed Julie in a hug. "Why did you do that? I told you nothing could hurt me." Julie only smiled, showing teeth covered in blood. I had to take the day off and think about it. She took a bullet for me. That was fine. She knew about the time loop, so it was a meaningless gesture. Except it wasn't. It's one thing to be told about the loop and believe it with your mind. It's quite another to put your life on the line. Julie didn't live in that reality every day. When I told her about it, it was always a new concept to her. And no matter how much convincing evidence I presented, she always had the suspicion that I was delusional or playing some elaborate trick. Besides, I still didn't know exactly how the loop worked. Was the whole world paused while I relived the day? Or was time moving for others, not me? There was too much uncertainty for me to risk someone else's life. But Julie had taken the risk. Either she was absolutely sure of me and believed in me 100%, or she was just willing to die for me. I knew she loved me, but her self-sacrifice smoothed out some of the anger I was still subconsciously holding inside. I didn't know what this meant for us after the cycle ended. but it made me rethink some of my plans. Although I'd managed to get Julie out of my mind, it was always clear that I would have a scorched earth policy after the cycle ended. It may be too late to save our marriage, but maybe it doesn't have to be so hostile. I need to think about this some more. Here's what happened in Attack 27. Friday, July 15th, 2016 day, 16:05. I got out of bed and headed for the bedroom. I shook Julie to wake her up. Hmm. Hmm? What time is it? Is something wrong? She asked, wiping her eyes from sleep. You need to get up and take a shower. Put on something light and comfortable. I'll meet you downstairs when you're ready. Sam? What's going on? I gently pulled her into a sitting position. I'll explain at breakfast. We have a busy day today. Trust me. The last sentence threw her off balance a little. She swallowed another question and shrugged. Okay. You want me to get up? I'll get up. Be ready to talk when I come downstairs, Buster. I showered and got dressed in light pants and a t-shirt. We were going for a little run today. I was 15 minutes ahead of Julie, so I started breakfast. When she walked into the kitchen, I was already stripping the bacon and getting ready to boil eggs. Oh shit, I was planning on using that bacon for dinner tonight. I know, but we'll be in New York tonight. How do you know? Began Julie, embarrassed. Never mind. Since when are we going to New York today? Is this some last-minute work thing? No, it'll be easier if I show you something first. I invited Julie to follow me and left the kitchen, grabbing a few oranges from the fruit basket on the way. I led her to her room and handed her the TV remote. I stood with my back to the TV and started juggling the oranges. Julie looked at me like I had two heads. Since when have you been juggling? I've gotten a lot of free time lately, I replied. I also know a bunch of card tricks. We'll get to that in a second. Right now I need you to turn on the TV. Okay, now turn the sound off. I waited for her to do that. Now, without turning the sound off, change the channel to something you like. A smile appeared on Julie's face as if we were playing some kind of game. Okay, she said. What's next? You're going to incorporate it into a chain of home improvement stores. Right now they're selling gaudy turquoise jewelry for old ladies. Julie frowned, partly because she likes turquoise and partly because she wondered how I'd guessed that. She shifted her gaze from me to the TV behind me, then looked back to make sure I hadn't set up a mirror or something. Look, I'm going to close my eyes. Change it to something else. It's ESPN now. You tried to cheat and pick a channel you never watch. I opened my eyes. Now turn the sound off. When Julie turned the sound on the TV, I listened for a second to where the broadcast was going and then started talking to the sports announcers. I had about 20 minutes memorized, so I managed to synchronize so well that it felt like I was talking in stereo. At the same time, I kept juggling. Finally, I dropped the oranges, walked over to Julie, took the remote from her slackened hand, and turned off the TV. What was that? She asked, shocked. That was creepy, Sam. How did you do that? You always pick the same channels. After 20 or 30 tries, it becomes very easy. Julie's mouth worked, but no sound came out of it. I led her into the kitchen and sat her down at the table. I've been reliving the same day, today, for over 4 years now. I don't know exactly, I've lost a few days here and there. Every day I wake up in the guest room, and it's July 15th, 2016. She, of course, had questions, most of which I still couldn't answer. I had a lot of guesses about how the time loop works, and one very big one about how to stop it. But until we dealt with the elephant in the room, I left those questions aside. It took about 20 minutes before Julie started to get nervous. She's a smart woman, smarter than me. It was beginning to dawn on her that I'd lived through this day 1,000 times already. And she knew what she planned to do this afternoon. Did I know? How could I not catch her with so many chances? Besides, I wasn't exactly myself. Not the loving husband she had known the day before. I hadn't used any affectionate words or touched her. We had talked about this before, but I was still somewhat surprised that she was the one to bring it up. Maybe she could tell I knew. So, Sam, if you've lived this day so many times, you've probably caught me doing something I'm not proud of. Before I could respond, she burst into tears. I pondered whether I should leave Julie in the dark, deal with her infidelity if and when Saturday came. If I wanted to make a play, she might think I was still in the dark, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to play house. Let the lies come out, and if tomorrow came, we'd start fair and square. We had another long discussion about the chances of our marriage. Remember, it was always a fresh pain for her. Listen, Julie, we're not going to sit here and sort this shit out today. I'm sorry you don't remember this, but we've discussed it many times before. I read your journal. She sighed. Wait, don't freak out. Yes, it was bad. But you might be the luckiest bitch in the history of cheating wives. I've had over 4 years to get over it. You won't notice all the pain and agony I've been through. You won't even remember all the petty revenge I got. And what if I also missed my chance to get you back? She snorted. What if I never get the chance to try to save my marriage? Well, all I can say to that is that you should go back and reread your old diaries. Whatever relationship we came to on Saturday, you can thank your lucky stars that fate kept me by your side. Because if I hadn't been stuck in a time loop after reading what you did, I might never have approached you again. I left her with some hope. At least hope that I wouldn't cut her out of my life completely. I'm not just bringing you up to speed today. I still don't know much about the time loop, but I think I figured out how to stop it. Julie pulled herself together. I think she realized that the best thing she could do was to stay by my side and try to regain my favor. If I was talking to her and planning something with her, those were good signs. So she tried not to dwell on her fears for our marriage. How can you stop this? She asked, wiping tears from her eyes. Tonight, or rather, early tomorrow morning, a nuclear bomb is going to go off in Manhattan. Oh my God. Our marital problems were momentarily forgotten. Are you sure? Of course you're sure, but how? Why? I'll give you all the details during the day. It took me a long time to realize what was going on. My day reset when the bomb went off. It happened so fast that I don't even have time to realize what it was. Anyway, I found the location and outlined a plan of attack. We've already made several attempts to stop it. Attempted? Yeah, that's crazy. Is that what we're doing tonight? Stopping a nuclear explosion? Julie giggled a little nervously. It was really hard to wake up from this kind of drama. I don't think I would have handled it as well. We had a schedule to keep, so I was pushing her. We both had to take time off from work. Julie agonized over what to say to her boss. She already knows about your adventures. Just tell her you got caught, and you'll have to spend the day with your husband. Julie's eyes clouded at that, but it was in keeping with her policy of honesty, so that's what she did. I told my boss Ben the same thing, but said, I'd be there in about an hour to take care of some business. Julie and I took the train to New York. We went to Broadwell and Mark's, where she waited in the lobby while I went upstairs to make my trades before the market opened. Now that I had a real prospect of getting out of the loop, I wanted to make sure the money balloon was set in motion. Besides, I was going to need them again today. Afterward, we went to Sung's dojo, where I performed a feat similar to what I had done with Julie. Only in Sung's case, it wasn't a TV, but a radio. Sung had music playing in his dojo at all hours of the day and night. I told him to pick a channel, and I would talk along with him. Sung decided he had a trump card up his sleeve. He used an internet service to broadcast a Korean talk radio station. When he turned the station on the speakers in the gym, he was first shocked that I was speaking Korean, and then that I was speaking in unison with the hosts. I made sure his sister Misuk attended the demonstration, to which she agreed with poor grace. After the demonstration, she was still as sour as usual, but I got her attention. You don't know me, but I know you. I've been going to this dojo for years. I'd like to think that under different circumstances we could be friends. Maybe we'll get that chance. But I need you both for something specific today. Sung was intrigued. Misuk was annoyed. What can I do to help? Asked Sung, just as Misuk replied, I'm not going to get involved in this American's madness. I'll need both of your skills. Sung, I know you were a soldier and an interpreter. I'm going to need your language skills. Misuk, I know you served in the 9th Special Forces Brigade of the Republic of Korea. Her eyes widened. She looked like she wanted to attack me, which I really wanted to avoid because she would kick my ass regardless of my training. We talked a lot. Lie. I know you don't remember, but if we had a whole day to talk, you would have eventually confided in me. Big lie. I don't think Mi-suk bought into my ramblings, but it did diffuse her anger somewhat, since she was at least allowing for that possibility. In fact, almost everything I knew about her, I learned secondhand from her brother. Before we'd started storming the terrorists together, she hadn't spoken more than 10 phrases to me in a day. I knew I had to get to the point before she ran out of patience. North Korean terrorists are planning to detonate a bomb in New York City tonight. That got their attention. The only thing Mi-suk hated more than polite conversation was North Korea. Sung harbored surprisingly little animosity toward a man who had grown up in a divided country, but Mi-suk hated the North. She wanted to know more and seemed ready to beat it out of me if I wasn't ready. And I had to be very careful with the information I gave to Sun and his sister, especially his sister. They might believe me about the time loop, but they wouldn't trust me to lead the squad if they knew the whole story. The first time I tried to engage them, I made the mistake of saying the bomb was nuclear. It was only the fact that Mi-suk didn't know I knew how to fight that allowed me to get out of the dojo. I surprised her with a throw over my hip when she tried to grab me, and made my way out the door to the street. I suspect I would have spent the rest of that day in a lot of pain if I hadn't told her exactly what she wanted to know. On the way out, I warned Julie not to say a word about the explosion being nuclear. I had to greatly downplay the seriousness of this terrorist attack, or Seong and Mi-suk would demand that I hand over the information to the proper authorities. They still tried, but I managed to convince them to just help me. Mi-suk, once she liked the idea, happily agreed to foil the North Korean terrorist plot, even if I let her believe it was small-scale. As 0 hour approached and I laid out more information, they realized the matter was more serious than I had realized. But by then, it would have been too late to involve anyone else. I left them with instructions to clear the evening and be ready to go at 7 p.m. We would pick them up after dinner. We went out and got something to eat. I needed some way to kill time while my bank account was growing. I started giving Julie directions for the evening and also reminded her what not to say in the presence of Sung and his sister. After dinner, we went to a boutique where you can rent a car that you could never afford. I let the salesman show me a Ferrari and a Lamborghini for a few minutes. What I'd really like is something comfortable that screams luxury. You have full-size sedans, not limousines, but maybe a little smaller. As I knew he would, he led me to another garage where there were 3 Maybachs in a row. They were maroon, silver, and black in color. The salesman started to lead me toward the silver one, but I interrupted him. I'll take the black one. It's perfect. Sir, it has some features. It's not exactly... Then it's the one I want. The best one of all. Besides, I love black cars. And the expression on his face was somewhere between hurt and annoyance. Sir, this car rents for $18,000 a day. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in this one, I said, and pulled out my credit card. The salesman didn't get warm until the bank approved the deal. He was trying to convey to me that this Maybach was an armored car. I knew that, but wished he could honestly say he hadn't told me that. Just in case someone later wanted to know why I was behind the wheel of a small tank today. The car also had a high-tech radio system in the front because most of the people who rented it had a team of security guards to keep in touch with. My story was that my wife and I are going through a rough patch in our marriage, and we wanted to have a night on the town with no expense spared. We would spend the day at various places and then pick up our friends Sung and Mi-suk. We stumbled upon the terrorists by accident while overhearing a radio program in the rental car. Very, very flimsy, and it would take tampering with evidence to have any credence at all. Unfortunately, I couldn't think of anything better. We needed an excuse as to why we went to the police ourselves instead of waiting for them. We would say we heard sounds that sounded like criminal activity and were in the area riding in a rented luxury car. As we listened, we realized the urgency of the situation, and like any good citizen, we came upon 11 armed terrorists. Yes, that's right. I was counting on thanks for what we did, and not a lot of questions about why and how we did it. The only excuse I could cite was that Mi-suk was a special forces officer, Seong was a former soldier, and I claimed to be their star pupil. I needed them to support me in this. Julie was there for me because she was my wife, and because we weren't going to get into a firefight. Julie and I drove around New York City in a Maybach, hitting the most ordinary places: Broadway, Times Square, Central Park. We ate at an upscale Italian restaurant and then picked up Sun and me Sook. We made one detour to intercept a courier and pay him a hefty bribe to let me spoil the food he was carrying. I made sure to wear a hooded sweatshirt so he couldn't see my face. I had to show him what I was putting in the food so he wouldn't think I was trying to poison someone. For $2,000, he stopped asking questions. We continued to drive aimlessly around Manhattan. The purpose was twofold: to put a lot of miles on the Maybach to justify renting it, and to discuss plans of attack with the entire group. Sung understood his role in this venture and its necessity. With me, Sook, it was a little more complicated. I have to lead the main assault. You don't have the training for something like this. In fact, none of us should be doing this. We should call the authorities. We've been over this before, Misuk. I can't explain how I know what I know, not to the government. And they don't have my inside information. I don't want to be arrested on suspicion of terrorism, which they will fundamentally do if I know so much about the inner workings of real terrorists. And your role is very important, I added. I can't do that. You're the only one with those skills. I don't like it anyway, she grumbled. She'd like it a lot less when she realized all the things I hadn't told her. We repeated the plan over and over, me telling them about all the possible pitfalls I had learned about from previous attempts. At 11 o'clock, we started the first phase. Julie had a simple job, but an extremely important and demanding one. In the morning, we brought a baggy sweatshirt and sweatpants from home. Julie put them on over her clothes. She also took a tire changer out of the Maybach, which she carried in her largest purse. Remember, walk in the door at 11:17 sharp. You have 7 minutes to get a seat. Got it. I'll be ready, she paused. Thank you for letting me be present for this. It means a lot to me. She quickly jumped out of the car and walked away, wiping her eyes. We were a block away from the embassy, and Julie had no trouble walking. She stood on the sidewalk until 11:17, and then quickly walked through the doors and into the lobby. The night receptionist and the night security guard were in the restroom. The security guard went to the restroom at this time every night, but I had to get creative with the night clerk. I slipped a laxative into his Chinese delivery. It took a few days to get the dosage right. He went to the bathroom all the time, but I needed him to leave at the same time as the guard. With the lobby left unattended, Julie walked straight down the hallway to the security office. A month ago, I bribed one of the day staffers to give me the code to the door. She punched the code into the keypad, and the door opened with a click. The first room was the duty desk, where the images from the cameras installed in the lobby, elevators, and public areas of the building were stacked. I instructed Julie where the cameras were and to keep her hood on. The security office was several rooms. There was the duty officer's station, a restroom where the guard was currently located, a break room, and a sleeping area for those who needed extra personnel. Since there was only one guard on night duty, the bunk room was not used. Julie could spend time in there until the attack, as long as she kept quiet. With Julie in place, we continued our night cruise until 2 a.m. 2 a.m. I drove the Maybach into the parking lot under the high-rise using the 56th Street entrance. The parking lot used an automated ticketing and payment system. There were only a few cars in the parking garage at this time of day, so I pulled into a quiet corner and stood there. 3:15 a.m. The terrorists showed up and set up their roadblocks. They killed a lobby clerk and a security guard and 6 other unlucky people working late into the night in various offices in the embassy building. Julie had to hide under a bunk bed in the bunk room of the security room. The terrorists quickly inspected the room, but they were only expecting one night guard, so they did not conduct a thorough search. Sung, Mi Suk, and I listened to the Maybach on the radio. It was an advanced model that could be tuned to the frequency used by the terrorists, as long as I knew their cipher. We could even talk to them if we felt suicidal. Sung was getting more and more worried, and Mi Suk was getting more and more angry. Why the hell are we letting them kill these people? Shouted Mi Suk. You knew this was going to happen, so why are we sitting here with our finger up our ass? I'm sorry, I said regretfully. I tried to think of ways to hit them while they were still on their way, but there was no way. Any attack before they get underway and they'll detonate the bomb. It's a big one. If it goes off, it will kill a lot more than 8 people. The only way to defeat these guys is after they scatter and get comfortable. Sung looked worried. How big is this bomb? Big. Bigger than the Oklahoma City bombing. Shit. Yeah. I wish I could save everyone, but this bomb can't go off, so get ready. It's almost game time. We gave the terrorists until 4 a.m. to get comfortable. 4:03 a.m. I turned to Mi Suk. You're up. The sniper team goes in at 4:11. You have to make your move no later than 4:13. I know my role. I hope you can do yours. Mi Suk's task was to take out the sniper and his adjuster. She didn't have the opportunity to lay low like I did. I don't know how she managed to get to them undetected and not make a fuss, but Mi Suk was the best of us in this arena. From the very first assault attempt, she never once failed, unlike the rest of us who screwed up repeatedly. She questioned me thoroughly about every aspect of the sniper team's position, including the ones that didn't make sense to me. She walked across the garage to the stairs leading to the sniper team. I pulled the Maybach up to the 57th Street exit, across the street from the embassy. I made sure the headlights were off so the two observers wouldn't see them coming out from under the high-rise. One of the terrorist barricades crossed the entrance and exit of the parking lot, but I didn't care. 4:08 a.m. I called the police. It was part of covering my ass. 911. What's your emergency? There are terrorists in the building at 57th and Park Avenue. They say they have a bomb. Sir, may I have your name and location? Officers are on their way to... There's no time. I have to try and stop them. Sir, don't... I hung up the phone. With terrorists and a bomb threat, the police wouldn't just show up. They would have to call in a special response team and bomb squad. By the time they got there, it would be over, one way or another. 4:09 a.m. I've pulled up to within 10 feet of the barricade, just in view of the terrorist watchers. 4:11 a.m. All the terrorists checked in with the North Korean in the security room. He was the one directing the mercenaries' actions from his duty station, from where all the cameras were recording. It would be 12 minutes before he checked in with the various commands again. I sent a text to Julie, who had her phone on vibrate, and let her know everything was ready. That was our window. 4:12 a.m. Mi Suk killed an adjuster on the 9th floor of a high-rise by snapping his neck. She took his silenced pistol, walked down the hallway, and fired it into the sniper's back. He never became aware of her presence. 4:13 a.m. Julie came out of the bunk room, snuck up on the North Korean man in the front office, and hit him in the head with a tire iron from a Maybach. 4:15 a.m. Mi Suk was at the ready with a sniper rifle. 4:17 a.m. Mi Suk opened fire. 2 shots separated by less than a second. Thump thump. One observer panning over 30 feet away from the other. Both shots to the head. Simultaneously, I hit the gas in the Maybach. A Maybach 62 weighs 6,000 pounds, not including armor and bulletproof glass. Essentially, I was driving a tank with nearly 600 horsepower. I drove through the heavy wooden barrier as if it didn't exist and accelerated across the street. Mi Suk was a machine. She had mastered her role the first night, so I could time it almost to the second. The second watcher was still dropping when the Maybach pulled out of the parking garage. Speed was crucial here. The mercenary in the lobby could see one of the watchers outside through the window. He wasn't looking that way when the observer's head exploded, but we didn't have much time. I accelerated the car to 20 miles per hour and burst through the double doors into the lobby, making a quick left toward the information kiosk. The mercenary there was caught off guard. Instead of reaching for his huge machine gun, he grabbed a pistol off the counter. He managed to fire 3 shots before the Maybach destroyed the kiosk, and with it his own. To his credit, he was a good shot. All 3 of his shots hit the center of the windshield in front of me. Luckily, the glass was bulletproof. We still had to move fast. We weren't out of the woods yet. I left the car running and Sun stayed behind the radio. I ran outside and grabbed the corpse of the mercenary I had crushed. I took the walkie-talkie from him and held it at the ready. While we waited in the parking lot, we listened intently to the terrorists talking on walkie-talkies. Sung's main job was to listen intently to the North Korean who was directing the action from the security office. Once Julie had gotten his brains into it, Sung would have to make contact and impersonate him. He was the best man for the job. He and the North Korean were from villages only 10 miles apart and separated by the Korean demilitarized zone. After listening to him for an hour, Sung was able to copy his voice and speech patterns well enough to fool even other North Koreans, especially over the radio. Now it was necessary to explain what the commotion was about. The three other North Koreans were in the ambassador's office on the fourth floor, where there was good soundproofing. They probably didn't hear anything, but there were two soldiers in the embassy lobby who should have heard the rumbling. "What's that noise down there?" one of them asked. Sung replied, "There's nothing on the cameras, it must have been outside." Now it was my turn. The sniper was a South African. I had a month to get his voice right. Some drunk didn't see the barricade. He swerved and crashed into the corner of a building. "Are we compromised?" Sung asked. "Do we need to speed up the work?" "Negative command," I replied. Domcop pulled the car away from the building and turned on the lights. "The building looks okay. We're fine." I know. That should keep them happy upstairs for at least the next 10 minutes. I ran back to the security office. Julie opened the door for me. The North Korean she'd hit over the head was sitting behind the monitors. As usual, Julie was too squeamish to pile on all her weight, so he was just unconscious. I raised the silenced pistol I'd gotten from the lobby merc. "Twop, twop, twop, twop!" I shot him 3 times in the chest. Julie squealed. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything earlier, but there must be no survivors. We can't have them contradicting the story we're going to tell the cops and the government. If we let any of them live, they'll squeeze them dry, and then they might notice that our story doesn't add up. These guys were going to kill millions of innocent people. I'm not going to lose any sleep." "Good," I said. "We have to move on. Did you disable the security cameras?" "Yeah. As soon as I hit that guy, I flipped the switches you told me to." There were a few things I didn't want anyone to see later. For example, I couldn't have video of Julie leaving the security office. She had to be in the car. If they had seen her come out, they would have started looking for how she got in. And they would have seen that someone had gotten in there 4 hours before the terrorists arrived. Now the tapes would be blank starting at 4:13. They would have to take our word for it, as we did. And just as I couldn't afford to let any of the terrorists live, I couldn't afford to have visual evidence that we were lying about what happened tonight. When I was asked how I knew everything I was doing, I couldn't tell the truth. The authorities would never have believed I was caught in a time loop. They would have torn my life apart to find out how I had detailed knowledge of the nuclear attack. "Have you ever heard of rendition?" So I had to lie. Julie did too, even though it hurt her. I couldn't leave any witnesses or video footage that would contradict the story I'd built. I checked to make sure the cameras were off. Julie had let me down more than once. It was 4:21. "Okay," I said. "Here's the remote that controls the elevators remotely. In 2 minutes, push this button. Got it?" "Got it." "Once that's done, get in the back seat of the Maybach and stay there." Julie hugged me as I left. I let her. I jogged across the hall to the stairs, waving goodbye to Song on the way. His work on the radio was done. From now on, I had 7 minutes to get it over with. At 4:28, the North Koreans would launch a nuke with a 30-minute countdown. I had no idea how to stop the timer, so I had to get there first. Sleep was now in the process of cleaning up. I tossed the radio I'd taken off the lobby merc onto the floor next to the body. Sun was to take that radio, and the 2 others taken off the dead mercenaries outside and disable their encryption. Mi-suk was to do the same with the sniper team's radios. I don't know. We couldn't claim to have overheard the walkie-talkies in the car if all their radios were encrypted. I told them both to take the radios through their shirts so as not to dirty the dials with their fingerprints. Meanwhile, I jogged up the stairs to the 4th floor. When I reached the door to the 4th floor lobby, I raised my gun and waited for Julie to take the elevator. I heard a zing as the elevator arrived. I swung the door to the stairwell open and stepped outside with my gun at the ready. The 2 mercs standing guard turned to look at the elevator. I shot the one on the right twice in the back. The second guard made it halfway down before I shot him twice as well. They both went down. Walking up to them, I put another bullet in the head of each of them, just to be sure. I'd come a long way since I'd been sickened by the sight of blood the first night I shot one of them. At the door to the ambassador's office, I paused. I'd gotten to this point 6 times already. 4:25 a.m. "Showtime," I whispered. As I burst through the door, I saw a familiar scene. Cameras were spread throughout the room, pointed toward the center. Right in the center was a nuclear bomb. It was a 6-foot-long metal box that looked like a skinny coffin with a keyboard on top. It had been brought in on furniture carts. Two terrorists stood over the ambassador and his family. One held his wife by the hair. Another, looking into a camera at the other end of the room, shouted a nationalistic tirade against South Korea and the United States. A third was standing by the nuclear bomb. He was between her and me. All the North Koreans had remote detonators. I warned Julie not to even breathe on the one in the security office. The three of them had set their detonators on top of the nuclear bomb, with one of them at arm's length the entire time. I raised my gun and fired a clip at the terrorist standing by the bomb. This guy was a tough son of a bitch. I'm not a good enough shot to risk my head, and I knew from previous attempts that if I shot him less than 4 times, he'd still hit the detonator with his finger. I tossed the empty gun aside. The two remaining North Koreans stood in stunned silence. This was my moment to say something heroic. I thought about it for a long time. I thought of something tough and patriotic, like, "Not in my country, you son of a bitch." But I'm no Toby Keith. I ended up settling on a quote from the movie. That was much more to my liking. "I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm out of bubblegum." Silence. And then the ambassador's teenage daughter giggled. Good for her. One of the North Koreans rushed to the detonators. I moved after him. It was a race. We were equal in speed, but he slowed down, preparing to grab the detonator. I didn't slow down. As he approached, I leaped into the air and delivered a kick to the side of his head. My kick landed precisely on his jaw, lifting his head up and to the side. The sound of his neck snapping was like a gunshot. I landed badly and had to scramble to my feet, but the last terrorist just stood there staring at me wide-eyed. He had no weapons and I was between him and a nuclear bomb. He had only one way to get to the detonators, through me. He unleashed a barrage of kicks and punches on me. He used traditional Hapkido, a Korean martial art. Unfortunately for him, Sun had taught me his own version of Hapkido, which was much more suited to real fighting. I landed a few blows on his body and face. He was tiring quickly, but I wasn't going to take any prisoners today. When he tried to land a high kick, I caught his leg. I weighed 60 pounds, so when I pulled him forward by his leg and delivered a knee strike to the middle of his torso, it knocked him off his feet. I was still holding his leg and he was in no shape to land on one. He dropped like a stone and hit the back of his head on the floor. I followed him and elbowed him in the throat with all my might. Leaving him squirming and choking on his own blood, I made my way to the ambassador's family. I spoke to them in Korean. "It's all right. You are safe now. The police will be here soon." Thank you very much. Those people, they said it was a nuclear bomb." "Yes, I heard that. The professionals will be here soon to deal with it." I turned to the last North Korean who was still twitching weakly. "Why don't we get your wife and daughter away from all this, huh? Your waiting area is empty. Why don't you take a seat there while we wait for the cavalry to arrive?" The ambassador nodded in agreement and led his family out of the room. As soon as the door closed, I headed over to the laptop on which the terrorists were compiling all the video footage. They intended to send it to their comrades in arms to broadcast it in triumph. But I had another use for this footage. First, I stopped all video feeds, then went around and made sure every camera was turned off. I collected all the video and uploaded it to cloud storage. Then, using my laptop, I sent out a few emails with the video attached to my parents and Julie's parents, along with a short note saying that we might be detained for questioning. But here's what you need to know. The video spoke for itself. The terrorists explained quite clearly what they were doing, repeating it in both Korean and English, and it would show me running into the room and saving the day. I especially wanted it to go to my father, who was a retired lawyer. Perhaps I was paranoid about letting conspiracy theories take over, but I worried that the government would try to scuttle it, to my detriment. Better to be reassured. After it was done, I made sure to change the radios of all the terrorists on this floor. Now all their radios were tuned to an unencrypted frequency. I went down to the lobby and made sure Sun changed the radios in the car. Then I gathered the baggy sweat clothes that Julie and I had put on over our clothes earlier in the day and went down to the basement where they had a document shredding furnace. I was just making my way back to the lobby when the police arrived in droves, filling the street from one end to the other. I looked at my watch. 5:03. I made it to Saturday. My feelings were conflicted. The time loop was soul-tearing at times. It made everything seem meaningless. It was like purgatory, but in a way, I was grateful to be in it. Aside from the obvious, preventing millions of deaths, I believed I came out the other side better. I'd never really thought about when I saw the way out, but already I was questioning what I could have accomplished if I'd stayed in the time loop a little longer. The loop was an unprecedented opportunity for self-improvement, but I could only truly appreciate its positive aspects now that I had proof that it wasn't infinite. For the millionth time, I wondered for the millionth time what the time loop really was and how it worked. I resigned myself to the fact that I would never get any real answers. At first, the connection to the nuclear explosion led me to believe that the loop had a scientific explanation, that the enormous force released had somehow distorted time. But this explanation did not satisfy me, not least because I was the only casualty and was not even originally in the blast zone. Nor did it explain how I had accidentally acquired a set of skills and acquaintances uniquely suited to the problem. No, more than ever before, I was certain that some sort of intelligence was at work here. But who or what was directing this cycle? And, just as importantly, why me? I snapped out of my reverie. There were more pressing matters to deal with. Sung and Julie were already sitting in the Maybach, and I quickly joined them. I wanted us all in an armored car in case the police stormed the building. There was no point in risking friendly fire, especially now that I was sure my death would be irreversible. For now, the police were just surrounding the building, but they weren't going to sit idle forever. I assumed they would try to make contact with the terrorists. I later learned from Mi Suk that the first police officers arrived less than 10 minutes after my call. They were greeted by two bodies with their heads blown off lying in front of the building. This made them take my reports of armed terrorists with a bomb seriously. It took them almost an hour to get all their ducks in a row. The street outside was filled with special counterterrorism teams, SWAT teams, bomb squads, and hostage negotiators. I don't know what the standard reaction to such a situation is, but I certainly didn't envy them. My own encounters with these terrorists had taught me that they would have exploded at the first sign of a police officer's presence. Fortunately for them, I took care of that. Song, Julie, and I were burning up the airwaves on our cell phones. Song was talking to his sister in the high-rise across the street, ordering her to drop all the weapons she'd taken from the sniper team and wait out the police somewhere. Preferably on another floor, away from the bodies of the men she had killed. We all expected a tense police reaction when, upon entering the building, they found 4 civilians and 11 bodies. 19 if you count the innocents the terrorists killed when they entered the building. Julie called her parents, woke them up and directed them to the emails I had sent them, and then hung up and called the TV news station. She gave them no details, only that there had been a terrorist attack at 57th and Parkway. We wanted to make sure the media was aware of what was going on, if the police presence hadn't alerted them already. As for me, the first thing I did was call my dad in Florida. He was always up early, so he was already up. "Hey, Dad, I need you to check your email. I sent you something." "It's not another cat video, is it? I told you not to send me those Sams." I never sent my dad cat videos. He was just messing with me. I smiled at the thought of how shocked he would be when he saw the video I sent him. "What the hell is this? It looks like an extremist propaganda video. I can't understand what they're saying." "They're speaking Korean. If you watch the video in its entirety, they occasionally switch to English. I sent you 4 video files. They all show the same thing from different angles. Eventually, I will want you to watch all of them, but right now, I need you to skip ahead to the last few minutes." "I'll wait." There was a pause. I could hear the video playing on the phone. I heard my father sigh as the door swung open. There was silence after the father saw his son, a Wall Street trader, kill 3 people. "Sam. Son, what did I just watch? Was it real?" "It's real, Dad. All I can say right now is that they were very bad people. You'll see that when you watch the rest of the video. I promise I'll answer all your questions later. But right now, I need Jim Watley, the scary lawyer, not Jim Watley, my father." Even though he's retired now, my father was an evil son of a bitch when it came to defending his clients. I couldn't have imagined a better man. Right, my Jim said, his lawyer instincts taking over. What kind of trouble are we in for? Hopefully none, I replied. I'm right, of course, but that metal casing in the video is a nuclear bomb. Heads will fly down and the government will be heavily involved. I need you to make sure none of the shit that starts flying falls on me or my friends. Holy shit. Nuclear. My dad quickly got over the shock and got back to business. What friends? Who else is involved in this? Julie and a couple people you don't know, Sion and Misuk Kenji? Listen, I said, before he could ask any more questions. I'm sitting in the building where the video was shot, waiting for the police to rush in. I don't have time to talk. Right now, I need you to make sure that the video is in a secure location where no one from the government can take it away from us. As long as there is video evidence, I'm in no danger. Okay, I'll make some copies and make sure they're safe. I love you, son. Stay safe. I love you too, Dad. Thanks. My next call was to the police. Before the attack, we had all turned off our phones. The police dispatcher kept trying to contact me since I had used my phone to report the terrorist attack. I called and identified myself. I partially explained to the dispatcher that all the terrorists were dead, the ambassador's family was safe, and we were waiting in a car parked in the lobby. Except for Mi-suk, who was on the other side of the street. It took the police officers about 10 minutes to verify my story as much as possible. They went and got Mi-suk, examined the bodies of the sniper and his adjuster. They tried different phones at the embassy until the ambassador answered. He confirmed what I had told the dispatcher. 20 or so men in full military gear ran into the lobby. They spread out in different directions to clear the building. One guy came to the car and asked us to stay put. Several days of intense scrutiny followed. Sun and Mi-suk still didn't know that the bomb was nuclear. Julie and I knew, but we hadn't reported it yet. The presence of foreign terrorists already had government agencies swarming the site. When the bomb squad got a chance to get a good look at the bomb, the river of G-men turned into a flood. The intense surveillance I had expected became a reality. I was able to talk to my father again, although the FBI, where I was being monitored every second by an agent, was adamantly opposed. They wanted me cut off from the rest of the world until they could get all the details out of me. But my earlier call had gotten things moving. My father was cutting the phone lines, demanding access to me. The downside was that the lawyer's assistants made the interview process adversarial. Our interviewers went from skeptical to suspicious. To make matters worse, my father had contacted a law firm in New York, and we had an attorney with us at every interview. Plus, the government couldn't isolate us and grill us endlessly, which I suspected they were eager to do. We spent our days in a hotel close to the FBI offices for easy access. They tried to keep us separate, but the lawyers forbade it. We were supposed to cooperate, but we refused to be treated like criminals. So no days of interrogation and closing us off from the world. Despite all my planning, there was no way to frame our attack on the terrorists in a way that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Besides, some of the things I'd done to cover my tracks left traces, even if they hid the real truth. Although we came up with a lame excuse for how we discovered the terrorist plot, it was hard to believe that 4 civilians could have attacked 11 armed terrorists at the most inopportune moment. Before entering the building, we turned off the internal surveillance cameras, so only the moment I burst into the ambassador's office and massacred the last 3 North Koreans was caught on tape. Of course, the sudden cessation of videotaping aroused a lot of suspicion. No one believed it was a coincidence that the cameras stopped working when we launched the assault. Everything that was happening in the security room seemed false to them. Why would a terrorist turn off the cameras? He didn't care about them before. How did I get in? The door could only be opened with a code. Why was the North Korean shot and blasted in the head? My answer: I don't know. The door was open. I hit him after I shot him. I can't say why, maybe adrenaline. The first question really bothered them because I couldn't give a logical answer. I knew that disabling the cameras would arouse suspicion, but not as much suspicion as if the police could see what we had done. The straw that broke the camel's back was encryption of radio transmissions. Why did the terrorists take expensive encrypted radios with them, but broadcast over an open channel? Unfortunately, the FBI fingerprinted just about everything, including the radios. They didn't find any of our prints because we were so thorough. But they did find suspicious smudges where we used our shirts to turn the dials, and, more importantly, partial prints of the terrorists. If the terrorists didn't use the cipher on their radios, why were there prints all over the cipher dials? The combination of prints with cleaneries that looked like they'd been wiped clean. If we didn't have lawyers around us, we might have disappeared for a while. Almost all of the questions were about me. According to our story, Julie and Son stayed in the car the whole time. We carefully wiped down everything they touched outside the car. Julie made sure to touch as little as possible of the things in the security room and clean up after herself. So their stories were very simple. They had to answer the same questions about what preceded the attack, but they could deny their knowledge of what happened outside the lobby of the building. Now, Misuk had to describe what she was doing in the high-rise, but she could tell 99% of the truth. The only thing she hid was the interference in the sniper team's radios. She could even admit that she knew in advance where they were positioned. We heard them talking about it. By prior agreement, if any of the others had a question they didn't know how to answer, they would forward it to me. I had a lot more time to think than they did. That was my plan. We put up a united front, telling the authorities that I was leading the attack. There was skepticism that a Wall Street trader was the driving force behind the counter-terrorism operation, but there was plenty of evidence. My fingerprints were on the steering wheel of the car that took out the security guard in the lobby. 4 terrorists had been killed with the same gun. Not only were my fingerprints on the gun, but I was the only one with gunshot residue on me other than Misuk. Then, of course, there was the video. The video was my trump card, irrefutable proof that I was on the side of the angels. No one could watch that video and not break out in a cold sweat at how close we had come to killing millions of people. This video was also the reason for my first threat of jail time. It shows me walking up to the terrorist's laptop and stopping the video stream. That made them angry. They immediately trashed me for even touching it. What if tampering with it set off a nuclear bomb? Blah, 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 blah. When their text told them I used the laptop to copy and send those video files, oh shit. Homeland Security went into a frenzy. They immediately demanded access to the cloud account I sent the video from, as well as my parents' and Julie's parents' email accounts. They threatened to charge all of us with treason if we didn't hand over all copies. In fact, my cloud account disappeared the next day. I told them to pound sand. It was a complicated legal question as to whether they could classify the material I had first. Probably in the interest of national security they could. But it would be a cold day in hell if they could convict me. If I made the video public, and I told them I would if they messed with me, no jury in the country would convict me. If they had even tried to indict me, there would have been riots. I presented my interaction with the government as very hostile. To some extent it was. But for every bad cop who tried to beat answers out of me, there were 100 good cops who thought I was walking on water. My father, who was on the first flight in from Florida, along with a local law firm he brought in, protected our interests. But in retrospect, I believe everything would have been fine. We were surrounded by men and women who worked or lived in Manhattan and literally owed me their lives. We deserved some serious goodwill. I think every one of the people who interviewed us flew in from Washington. Our hotel looked like a government convention. FBI, CIA, NSA, Homeland Security, even the ATF. The only non-government employee I saw was the NYPD chief of police. I guess he was only allowed to stay here as a courtesy. The whole event was classified to hell. But since almost everyone in our hotel had high clearance, most of them had seen all or part of the terrorist video. "Why do all these people keep offering you bubblegum?" asked Julie. I laughed. On the first day, all the various government agents were acting aloof, trying to figure out what had happened. After the video hit the web, our reception warmed noticeably. When the CIA woman offered me a bubblegum, I didn't immediately understand. It was a strange offer. When I declined, she wrinkled her nose dramatically, and her partner burst into laughter. Then I laughed too when it got to me. From then on, government agents offered me gum all the time. I explained to Julie my heroic speech I'd given to the North Koreans. I'm out here chewing bubblegum and kicking ass, and I'm out of bubblegum. Did you really say that? When did you know people would see that? You're an asshole. I just smiled. Speaking of my wife, The week we spent as guests of the government was an eye-opener for Julie. She went to bed Thursday night with a devoted husband and woke up with an indifferent stranger. Perhaps it wasn't fair to her, but I had spent 4 years trying to distance us from each other while she had no way to fight it. I told her I knew about her affairs, but I didn't get angry. I didn't feel so upset about it anymore. It was like the world was asleep and I had turned into a completely different person. I had spent almost as many years in the loop as I had in my marriage. To get angry with Julie, I would have to look into an emotional pool that had long since dried up. All of this was very embarrassing to Julie. I discovered her infidelity, read her journals, got revenge, and moved on with my life. All in one day, from her point of view. We shared a room with 2 double beds. We were more like roommates than husband and wife. I was cordial towards her, even friendly. But that was about it. She really wanted to talk about our relationship, but I was putting it off until we were done with Uncle Sam. Any talk of us inevitably led to talk of the noose. I was too paranoid, fearing that the government was somehow eavesdropping, so we had to keep the conversations harmless. After a week, we had had enough. We relayed through our lawyers that the government might do one more interview, and then we would go home. My father said they went a little pale, but their hands were tied. We had cooperated so far, but legally they couldn't detain us, except in the interest of national security. I made it clear that I would release the video if they did. By this point, they had no idea how many copies had been made or who had them. Even I didn't know where they were all located since I had left it to my father. So, I sat alone in the conference room for my last interview. My father was not with me. The government had requested a one-on-one meeting. Dad didn't want to, but I agreed. By this time, I knew my story thoroughly. I wasn't going to reveal anything by accident. I hoped my cooperation would be remembered when I left the hotel in the afternoon. Besides, Julie, Sung, and Mi-suk had already given the okay to leave. I was wondering what exactly they wanted to ask me about and who I would be talking to. All interviews up to this point had been conducted by teams of agents. A balding man in his 60s or 70s walked into the room. "Hello, Mr. Watley. I'm General Bradley Pembroke, retired. I'm the President's National Security Advisor. I've been following you and your companions this week. I would like to speak with you before you head home." "It's a pleasure to meet you, General. If you have been following this process for the last week, I don't know what else I can tell you. I feel as if I've been squeezed dry." Pembroke threw me a sarcastic glance. "I think we both know that's not true. We may have bored you with our questions, but you have not been so forthright in your answers." I didn't bother to deny it. There was no anger in his voice, more like a father whose son had disappointed him. I had to fight the urge to apologize to this stately gentleman. He had an air of authority that demanded respect. "Well," he said, "be that as it may, I'm not here to try to learn anything new from you. No, I'd like to talk about what we're going to do next. What are your plans, Mr. Watley?" "My plans? I'm not sure what you mean. Will you be able to put this behind you? You have done a great service to the people of this country. By rights, we should be celebrating what you have accomplished. But by doing so, you will put the country and yourself in new danger." My father had already told me this, but I wanted to hear it from an authority figure. "How can I and the country be endangered?" I asked. "Asked me. Asked me." Nayet Pembroke interlocked his fingers and looked at me over them. "We can never reveal how close we came to disaster. Never. At least not in any of our lives. Think back to the fear that gripped the country after 9/11. How long it took before people felt safe flying on airplanes or attending major events. How would the nation react if it learned that a terrorist organization had managed to sneak a nuclear weapon into downtown Manhattan?" It was a rhetorical question, but I answered anyway. "They would have lost their minds." Pembroke crinkled slightly at my scolding, and I felt like an ignorant moron. Damn, that guy was good. If I wasn't careful, I'd reveal something just because I was trying not to disappoint him. He used his grandfatherly expression as a weapon. "Yeah," he pronounced. "Quite so. There's going to be mass hysteria. Not only that, but the public would demand accountability. We know who is ultimately behind this attack. North Korea." I jumped up. He made a grimace, as if sealing his lips. "As I said, we know who bears ultimate responsibility. Rest assured that this provocation will not go unanswered. But, if possible, we would like to administer justice with tactical precision. A catastrophe has been averted, and we have the opportunity to avoid escalation. The public will demand open conflict. We may well find ourselves drawn into a full-scale war. Far better to handle this quietly. I believed him. The news that North Korean terrorists had tried to detonate a nuclear bomb on American soil would have enraged the country. It was hard to imagine that anything less than war would satisfy the masses. As for you, Mr. Watley, if your role in recent events becomes widespread, I'm afraid your personal safety will be at risk. How so? You would make a great hero, but also a tempting target. Some of the terrorists are from a country that is well known for its brutality and willingness to strike across national borders. In addition, radical terrorists of all stripes will view you as tantalizing prey. A hero who rushed to the rescue to stop a terrorist attack. It will be a serious blow to American morale if that person meets a grim end at the hands of other extremists. You will have to make a lifelong commitment to personal safety. My father made the same point. North Korea had no problem carrying out assassination attempts outside its borders. We didn't think about the fact that I would be targeted by other radicals as well, but it made sense. If I became famous for killing terrorists, I could end up on the death list of every extremist sect that hated America, which was pretty much every extremist. I looked at Pembroke. I did briefly dream of fame and fortune, but the past week has dissuaded me of that. What will be the official story? No one denies that what happened was a thwarted terrorist attack, but the names of you and your companions will never be mentioned in connection with it. And anyone suggesting there was a nuclear component to the event will be quietly warned and then loudly discredited if necessary. Since your call to the police referred to terrorists with a bomb, that information became public. Everyone who entered the building was a government employee. The NYPD was not allowed in until the scene was cleared, so we can control the course of events. He paused briefly. You didn't give your name to the police dispatcher, but you called from your own registered cell phone. That's a problem. As far as we can tell, only a few police officers know your identity. We've done our best to keep this information hidden. It will be much better for you and the country if we let the world believe that this attack was prevented by government funds. So Uncle Sam is going to come in already ex post facto and take all the glory for himself? I asked, with a note of bitterness. Pembroke looked a little embarrassed. Unfortunately, yes. No offense, Mr. Watley, but in the realm of counterterrorism, you're a nobody. You are a civilian. You have acted skillfully, some might even say suspiciously. But you will never be able to strike fear into the hearts of the world's radical elements. They will chalk up your success to luck. I found this mildly offensive, but couldn't think of a decent counterargument. So I decided to give Pembroke a raspberry. He looked shocked. Then he chuckled. No, he said. You're definitely not James Bond, and we want everyone to think they're the ones who stopped the bomb. A team of highly trained government operatives, if North Korea or anyone else finds out how close they came. He paused to let me fill in the blank. They would immediately try again. Exactly. We don't know how they got that far this time. This has become a priority for every law enforcement and intelligence agency in the United States. It's also the reason why you, who should be the hero of the day, have gotten so little attention. Obviously, you know more than you're saying. We're trying to prevent a second attempt. Maybe again here, maybe somewhere else. Anything you haven't revealed could potentially be what we need to know to save millions. I cleared my throat. I'm 100% sure I don't know anything that could tell you how they sneaked a nuke into the country. I know nothing about their movements before they got to the embassy. Then how did you know they would be there? Asked Pembroke. I didn't. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, I said firmly. That was my standard answer whenever the government accused me of foresight. Pembroke opened his mouth to object, but I interrupted him. I'm going home after this. I understand why you are desperate for answers, and I wish you luck in tracking the movements of the terrorists and preventing any future attacks. If I may, I would like to offer you a hypothetical situation. Please continue. Suppose, hypothetically, that I concealed how much I knew and how I knew it, that I really did know in advance. Well, again hypothetically, that prior knowledge would have lasted hours, not days, Did you watch all the video, General? Did you see and hear what these North Koreans were up to? Yes, he replied. If Group 6 had broken into that building, what do you think would have happened? Are you implying that you're somehow more qualified than the SEALs, Mr. Watley? No, no, I said. That's not what I'm getting at. Now you know how all the terrorists were set up. The 4 North Koreans in the 2 locations had remote detonators, and they were in radio contact with all the other terrorists who were scattered on different floors and even different buildings. Could the SEALs have caught them all by surprise? So quickly and quietly that none of the North Koreans had a chance to detonate a bomb? Pembroke looked worried, but he was protecting his men. Mr. Watley, if you, a stock trader, could do it, I assure you the American military is more than capable, especially with the advance information you apparently had. Ah, but here's the rub, General Pembroke. In hindsight, knowing what you know now, would you have attempted the assault? With 4 fanatics with their fingers on the button, would you have risked entering that building? Remember, we're still reasoning hypothetically. That got his attention. He paused to seriously consider the question. No, I don't think I would order such an action. What would you do then? How would you stop them if you didn't risk attacking them directly? My first priority would have been to intervene before they reached. No, I interrupted. You may have tracked their movements. I have no idea where they spent that Friday, though I assume somewhere in or around New York City. You can't get to them before they reach a populated area. You can't risk a direct attack. What's to be done? Pembroke hummed irritably. He was a smart man. He knew what I was getting at. In retrospect, if we had known how tense the situation was, we wouldn't have gone into the building and tried to make contact. We would have fired several Hellfire missiles at the building until it was a pile of rubble, and the nuclear device was a mangled piece of iron. Would there have been much collateral damage in such an airstrike? I asked. No, very little if any. With today's tactical weapons, we could have razed that building to the ground up to its foundations without harming the neighboring properties. There would have been debris flying, but since the street in front of the building was nearly empty, injuries to passers-by would have been minimal. What about the ambassador's family? Pembroke paused. At that rate, Mr. Kuhn's family would have been an unfortunate sacrifice to save more lives. Well, General, I said, you have your answer, at least in this hypothetical situation. If I could have warned you in advance, 3 more innocent people would have died, as well as the destruction of a building and an even bigger public relations crisis than the one you're facing now. But what gives you the right to make those decisions, Mr. Watley? We would only use an airstrike if we deemed the risk of an explosion too high. If the United States government is unwilling to risk the lives of millions of New Yorkers, what gives you the right to risk them? I raised my hands to rub my face. It was still early, but this conversation was wearing me down. I have no good answer to that question, General Pembroke. Not one that makes sense to you. I can only say that on that day, I felt I was in a unique position to do something. And I did. I did. There may be a legion of people whose job it is to second-guess my actions, but personally, I've always considered the what-if game a colossal waste of time. Pembroke sighed. Are you absolutely certain you have nothing more to say? If I knew something that would help prevent another attack, I'd tell you right away, but I don't. I stood up, getting ready to leave. So, I said, is that it? I'm going to be clueless again? I won't see a bunch of repairmen camped out in my neighborhood, will I? No, Mr. Watley, no stakeout. Off the record, I must commend you on your quick thinking with that video. Certain elements would have tried to stalk you indefinitely if it weren't for the threat of you publicizing it. Between you and me, you're right. If the video had come out, we would have been powerless to prosecute you for it. But I hope you realize that any fame you achieve will come at a very high cost, both to you and to the rest of the country. Honestly, I didn't care. I was just happy that time had moved forward again, that I could start living a real life again. But I felt like I had to flounder in my stomach a little bit, just for appearance's sake. I understand. I can even see the logic in it. But I still feel bad that I can save so many lives without any reward or recognition. I realize that's a reward in itself. I feel good about the way things turned out. But still, I have a feeling the government would be just as happy to see the back of me. I'm sorry you feel that way, Mr. Watley, said Pembroke, leaning forward. Because I assure you, the nation is very grateful for your service. Moreover, I am authorized to inform you that after some time has passed, you and your wife, as well as Kenji, will be invited to a private audience at the White House. This stunned me. I whistled softly. It made sense under the circumstances, but I was still stunned at the thought of meeting the president. One more thing, he continued. You and your companions will receive a gift. For the next 5 years, you have been granted a moratorium on all taxes. Although, if any of you leave the state, you will have to pay taxes in the new state. The moratorium only applies to federal, New York, and New Jersey taxes. If you move, we can work something out. Wow, said I, stunned. That was a very nice gift, especially considering I'd made over $7 million in the stock market before I got out of the time loop. I didn't think the feds knew about it until... I understand you've made a nice profit recently. Quite recently. I only raised my eyebrows in mock innocence. If the government was requesting my banking information, they were doing it in secret, but I wasn't surprised that they had discovered my new wealth. I wondered what it all looked like from an outsider's perspective. I went from a white-collar guy, up to my eyeballs in debt on Thursday, to a cool millionaire, fighting kung fu style, scourge of terrorists on Friday. I'm Batman, I whispered to myself. Shit. I forgot where I was. I looked up at General Pembroke. He had obviously heard me, judging by the thinly veiled amusement on his face. I coughed and quickly got us back on track. I thanked the general for the government's generous gift. There was no further mention of my newfound wealth, though in retrospect I'm sure it only increased the cloud of suspicion around me. We made small talk for a few more minutes. He gave me a business card with his number in case I ever wanted to contact him. We then had a brief farewell ceremony and I headed home. In the end, Uncle Sam's gratitude outweighed his suspicions. Over the following weeks, I was contacted several times to clarify a particular issue for them. Sometimes I could be helpful, sometimes not. My role in preventing the terrorist attack never became public. The video remained invisible to the general public, although for the rest of my life, random people would come up to me and offer me chewing gum. There was a large intelligence community in New York, and I was treated like a little celebrity whenever one of them recognized me. For the most part, once I left the hotel that day, I put the events at the corner of 57th Street and Park Avenue in the past. I was a regular citizen. Now I was to return home and meet my wife. Technically, she was waiting for me to finish my meeting with the National Security Advisor, so she was coming home with me. But how much longer would this be our home? That was the question. We had an uncomfortable train ride to New Jersey and then an awkward ride home. I didn't think to worry about my Ford Taurus until we were back in New Jersey. Of course it was towed, since I had left it all week, so we had to hail a cab. As soon as we walked in the door, the dam burst. Please talk to me, Sam. This silence is killing me. We had talked quite a bit over the past week, but I knew what she meant. We hadn't talked about ourselves. Come on, I said. Let's sit down and talk about this. I'm sorry I put it off, but I really didn't want to talk about our marriage while we were guests of the government. I didn't want to distract from more important matters. They weren't more important to me, Sam. Nothing is more important to me than our marriage. I know you don't believe. I believe you, Julie, I interrupted her. She was ready to try to convince me. You believe me? Yes, I believe you. I believe that our marriage is more important to you than anything else. I believe that you love me. I believe that if I gave you a second chance, you wouldn't go astray again. Julie's face reflected a mixture of confusion and hope. That's not our problem, Julie. Feelings have never been our problem. Or rather, they've never been your problem. No, your problem is that your actions don't match your feelings. I know, she snorted. What I did was horrible. I never meant to hurt you. I sighed. What do you say to that? It was true from her point of view, but it was so idiotic. Well, you did. More than I ever believed another person could hurt me. You took the best thing in my life and turned it into a lie. You made me doubt myself on the most basic level. It took me a long time to regain my dignity and prepare to move on. Move on? Asked Julie. Does that mean you've already made up your mind? Don't I have a chance to fight for us to try to make it up to you? I've had 4 years to think about it, Julie. It would be very sad if in all that time I never made up my mind. Maybe from your point of view, it's unfair that you were left in the dark while I decided the fate of our marriage. But from my point of view, it couldn't be fairer. You kept me in the dark for years while you made a fool of me, and you had your chances. You've had our entire relationship together. If you'd stopped for once, if you'd really put me first, then there might have been hope for us. Tears ran down Julie's cheeks. In the week she'd spent thinking about it, she'd gotten rid of the tantrums I had every time I faced her in the noose. But she was still prone to bouts of crying. I think the time in the hotel when I treated her more like a roommate than a soulmate made her realize how much things had changed. "So what are you going to do, Sam?" Julie asked. Asked Julie in desperation. Asked Julie in desperation. "Do you really not love me anymore? Will you ever be able to forgive me?" "I still care about you, Julie. I don't know if you can call it love. I originally had a plan to get revenge on you, but I changed my mind. I've spent a lot more time with you in the last couple months of being in the time loop, and I remembered some of the things that made me love you to begin with. So, no scorched earth. The only thing you have to prepare for is me airing the dirty laundry of all my supposed friends." Julie went pale. "What do you mean?" "Well, according to my original plan, I was going to get hold of you and your sister's diaries and make copies for all your friends. Does Samantha know that Emma slept with her husband? Do any of the husbands know what happened at Claire's bachelorette party? I've been thinking about leaving all of this behind. For you. But that sack full of assholes who called themselves my friends never showed me any consideration. And, unlike you, they hadn't created any favor with me. I may not provide proof, but I'll still send a bunch of letters. Let them do their own investigation. All the dirty little secrets, at least the ones you and your sister knew about, are about to come out. I'm going to do them the favor they never did me. I hope they all choke on it." Julie was silent for a moment, trying to comprehend what all this meant to her. Obviously, her friends didn't care about her infidelity. They'd all known about it for years. But they might not be so forgiving when her demons started to haunt them. And, of course, there was her sister. "Sam, please don't do this to Emma. Please. Steve will abandon her. She'll be devastated. She's not like me, she hasn't gone astray often. Please." "My dear sister-in-law, my favorite member of your family who told me that I was the brother she had always wanted and who took such pleasure in telling almost everyone she knew how pathetic her sister's husband was in bed. Just talking about it made me wind up again. I discovered the rage I'd thought I'd left behind." "No," I said. "I'm not going to go into the reasons why you and all your friends and family deserve what's in store for them. You're all going to get off scot-free with goddamn ease, especially you. Be thankful that I want to put this period in my life behind me. I'm still young. I can build a better life for myself, and there's no room in it for people like our old friends. So I will send my letters, and they will cease to exist for me." "What about me?" whispered Julie. "Am I just a part of your past now?" I took a deep breath. "Yes?" While Julie curled up in a ball and sobbed, I pondered my decision. I seriously considered keeping some sort of relationship with my wife, but not as husband and wife. There was no hope for that. Simply put, I no longer had any desire for her. The mere thought of getting into bed with her made me shrink. Part of it was squeamishness because of the specter of all the other men she'd had fun with while we were married. But an even bigger problem was that I could never get over why she left. It always seemed to me that by sleeping with her again, I must be putting on a show. She killed the romance. I considered keeping my friendship with Julie. She had been my best friend for a long time. Character-wise, we were still a perfect match, and I was sure that if we could put our marriage behind us, we could have a wonderful friendship. But I had come to the conclusion that friendship was not really possible. We would always be overshadowed by our failed relationship. And even though I was ready to bury our marriage, Julie wasn't ready for that yet. It would be very painful for her if I maintained contact, but didn't give her the affection she still craved. It would be horrible for both of us. No, the best thing to do would be to end the relationship. Julie was young. She'd get over it. And I didn't need to live with the ghost of my past love life. Julie made several attempts to influence my decision, but she was playing against the deck. My love for her had faded. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I didn't waver. She couldn't get anywhere when she tried to talk about us. So long before our divorce became final, she resigned herself to the fact that she had lost me. Divorce. The divorce was probably the friendliest divorce I've ever heard of. There were no lawyers involved. I drew up all the papers myself and Julie signed them. You can get away with that as long as husband and wife can agree on everything. Our divorce was simple. I took my clothes and personal belongings and left everything else to Julie. It wouldn't have worked out before the time loop, given all the debt we had accumulated. But I used some of my money from day trading to pay off Julie's house and car. The only debt I left her with was student loans. All that was left was to pay the property taxes, and she could afford to live in our mansion. It may seem like an extravagant reward for cheating on her, but I think I got off cheap. If we had gone to court, she would have been entitled to a couple million more, since I made a fortune while we were married. Julie didn't know exactly how much money I had, but she knew it was a lot and could have fought for it. Plus, she'd been involved in saving the lives of millions of New Yorkers, and I never forgot that she took a bullet for me. She deserved something for that. I also made large cash gifts to Sung and Misuk. When all the paperwork was filled out and filed, I packed up the car and prepared to leave New Jersey and my past. Julie and I hugged one last time. I'll admit, my eyes clouded over. From what could have been and what never was. And if you ever find it in your heart to give me another chance, Sam. I only smiled sadly. We both knew this was the end. I settled into my new apartment in Midtown Manhattan, bordering Central Park. It had cost me $1.5 million. Even after paying Julie's bills and buying a new place, I still had over $4 million in the bank. Combined with the tax vacation, I was virtually secure for the foreseeable future. With a conservative investment plan, I could live on that money for the rest of my life. And since I'd been working for an investment firm since graduating from college. But I was too young to retire. During the time loop, I had already had enough of the carefree life of retirement. I was looking forward to a new challenge. By the way, my days at Broadwell and Marks were coming to an end. During my stay at the Fed Hotel, I excused myself from work on the same excuse as the first day: marriage problems. To say they were unsympathetic would be an understatement. The company culture was brutally businesslike. There was no room for personal life to get in the way of work. So deciding to go back there would have put me on thin ice. Fortunately, I didn't plan to stay there. The time loop killed my enthusiasm for the profession. I spent 6 years after college reading financial news like the Bible. I was constantly on the lookout for the next big thing or opportunity to beat the market. If not for myself, then for the company. During this cycle, it was like I was playing a video game with cheat codes. Making money in the stock market became as easy as breathing. I turned $20,000 into $7 million, all for myself. I had little enthusiasm for finding Ma and Pa Kettle another 0.3% for their mutual fund. I still had my finger in the air doing market research for my own investments, but my days of being a corporate chicken shit were over. As it turned out, Broadwell and Marks wasn't thrilled with me either. I joined the company already planning to quit, but it soon became clear that upper management was outraged, indeed, pissed as hell at me. I think I've mentioned before that executives were spying on their subordinates' personal trading accounts. Aggressive personal trading was encouraged. Well, my rise to wealth did not go unnoticed. My boss, Ben, told me about all the icy stares and snide remarks I was getting. Sam, what the hell did you do? Forget about it. Everyone in the company already knows what you did. How the hell did you do it? Erickson had 3 guys break down all your trades and figure out what formula you used. They've been working on it all week. Now I get it. They weren't mad that I became a millionaire overnight. They were mad that I didn't share it with them. And they had absolutely no idea how I did it. After talking to Ben some more, I got the full picture. Stock traders are always looking for a mathematical formula that will beat the market. The problem is that there is too much human error in the market for a computer to accurately predict stock movements. People don't behave predictably, and neither do companies or investors. That doesn't stop mathematicians from trying to create predictive models. At Broadwell and Marks, there were 2 theories about how I became a rainmaker overnight. The first was that I had developed my own formula, but no one believed it. It was talked about, but everyone thought the second scenario was much more likely: that I had somehow cheated the system. In my final trade order, there were 217 separate stock trades during July 15th, and not one of them was a losing trade. I gradually made money on each trade, which was close enough to an impossible success rate to make no difference. But all the companies and financial products I traded were too diverse for me to use inside information, which is the most common form of investment fraud. I highly doubted the SEC would pay attention to me. By and large, 7 million is chump change on Wall Street, and I knew that any investigation would find nothing, because there was nothing to find. As far as I knew, there was no law against using financial information obtained through time travel. Of course, I couldn't tell Ben or anyone else how I did it. He, like the rest of the executives at Broadwell and Marks, assumed that I had found something, some way to predict stock movements, probably illegal. They didn't care about the legal aspects of what I had done. They were just burning with greed, eager to get their hands on my method. They were doomed to disappointment, and they knew it. They wouldn't share either. I couldn't. It just gave me another reason to leave. I had unreasonable expectations of myself and made my superiors jealous. So I was out of a job. I settled into my new apartment and started looking for a job. I took a page out of Sung's book and started moonlighting as a translator. I worked mostly in the New York court system, but I was also hired by corporations to facilitate negotiations with foreign companies. It turned out to be a very satisfying and surprisingly lucrative occupation. It also allowed me to continue practicing the languages I was learning and gave me the incentive to continue my linguistic studies. My work as a translator, as well as managing my own portfolio, caused my bank balance to grow at a steady pace. So much so that these days I rarely think about money at all. My personal life has been satisfactory, though not overly fulfilling. The first woman I tried to pursue was Mi Suk. She was athletic and dangerous. She was the human equivalent of a panther. Unfortunately, her opinion of me ranked right up there with the cat shit on the sole of her shoe. I hoped that our shared interests, Hapkido, long walks on the beach, and saving New York City from terrorists would bring us closer together. And if you combine that with the chance to get to know each other better, no. I had to admit she'd never be a friend, let alone a love interest. I never found out exactly what she had against me. Maybe she was just a miserable bitch. During the time I was in the loop, I mapped out a few possible love interests. It took me a while to work through them all, but I found that I didn't have a real spark with any of the women I had my eye on. Not that I didn't enjoy the process. I was quite content with the bachelor life, and even if I didn't have the one in my life, I had a healthy dating life. Over the next couple years, I dated about a dozen women, with relationships ranging in length from 2 weeks to 6 months. As my 30th birthday approached, I started to feel a little insecure. I'm a romantic at heart, and I really enjoyed being married until the very end. Around this time, there was a new tenant in my house. The top floor of the building I lived in had 4 apartments of about 2,300 square feet. I had the northeast corner facing Central Park. The apartment next to me had been empty for a couple weeks now, as the elderly dentist and his wife had left for warmer climes. I was relaxing on the balcony when I got a call from Fred, the building manager. "Mr. Watley, sorry for the inconvenience, but could you do a little translator work this afternoon?" "Fred, I told you to call me Sam." "Sure, I can help out." "What do you have, another Guatemalan plumber?" I had become the go-to person in the building when someone encountered a language barrier. I was now fluent in 7 languages and 4 others, emphasizing the languages most commonly spoken in Big Appy. So I was usually able to help. I didn't mind. It was a great way to get to know my neighbors. "No, Mr. Watley, not a contractor this time. I've arranged to view the house next door to yours with Jean Fournier, a real estate broker. Jean helps foreign clients, mostly French and Germans, find homes in the city. Unfortunately, he's had some family emergency and won't be able to make it today, but his client doesn't want to reschedule. I have viewings scheduled for 3 other buyers this week, and they don't want to miss their window." "So does this client speak French or German?" "She does, and she speaks French. Jean says she speaks passable English, but if our language expert is right in the neighborhood, this could be your new neighbor, so if you get the crazy cat lady vibe, give me a sign and she and I will part ways." I laughed. "Sure thing, Fred. Send me a message when she arrives and I'll meet you at the house." Yvette was no Catwoman, unless you meant Michelle Pfeiffer. I was pretty much useless as a translator that day because my tongue was constantly slurring when speaking to her, a problem I hadn't had since college. Fortunately, her English was more than passable, so my services were not required. Instead of acting as a translator, I followed her around the apartment like a lovesick puppy. I'm surprised she wasn't frightened by the creep who lived next door. I must have made a better impression than I thought because when she left that day, she had a lease on the apartment and a date with me. That spark that was lacking with all the other women I dated with Yvette turned into a roaring flame. We hit it off right away. She was smart, she was funny, and she was insanely beautiful. In fact, objectively, I'd have to say she was out of my league. But apparently she had the same attraction I did, and for that I thanked my lucky stars. We had so much in common it was intimidating. We were both ex-professionals who had gotten rich off of white-collar work. I in the stock market and she in the lottery, something she was very ashamed of. I didn't judge her, because I didn't achieve my wealth through hard work. I was more surprised that there was a lottery in France. We both left our jobs, in finance and marketing respectively, to pursue our hobbies. I turned my love of languages into a job as a translator, while Yvette pursued a career as a classical musician. She even practiced martial arts. When she found out I was a regular at the Sunga Dojo, she invited me over and put on a show. She did Krav Maga and also practiced Savate, which is basically French kickboxing. To be honest, she was better than me, and only my size advantage made us equal sparring partners. When we made love, I thought I experienced only a pale imitation compared to the bliss I found with Yvette. She moved in with me 6 months later when her lease was up, and I contemplated proposing to her. Only one thing stood in the way. We were both hiding something. In my case, it was obvious. The loop. The time loop was the single most formative experience of my life. I felt I couldn't hide it from Yvette if I planned to spend the rest of my life with her. Plus, not being able to tell people about the loop left gaps in my life story. I had tons of skills but almost no backstory, and I blew a fortune in the stock market overnight without being able to explain it. There was a 6-7 year void in my life as I no longer socialized with former friends and colleagues. All of my current friendships are recent. New house, wealth, friends, job. I was a man of mystery, and Yvette couldn't help but notice that I was hiding something. Likewise, I could see that Yvette was hiding something. On a couple of occasions, I had Skype conversations with her family in Paris, and there were awkward pauses and reticence. It was remarkably similar to the way we communicated with my parents. I thought that maybe she had been through some kind of trauma or abusive relationship or something. So I didn't bother to find out, and Yvette didn't pry into my life gaps. But I think we both couldn't wait to open up to each other completely. Finally, one night, as we were getting ready for bed, Yvette turned to me. "Sam, I love you. I think we both want the same thing out of this relationship." "Well, not exactly," I said, and raising both hands to chest level, made a honk gesture. Yvette giggled, but immediately got back to the point. "Stop it, asshole. I'm being serious. I've never felt this way about anyone, including my ex-husband. But for this relationship to last, I can't keep secrets from you." It was very nice of her not to say, "We can't have secrets," but it was implied. And it just so happened that I agreed with her. "You're right," I sighed. "I think we both have a lot to tell each other. I'll admit, I kept putting it off. My story, she's going to sound crazy. I have a few people who can corroborate it, but, I bet after you hear what I tell you, you won't be so quick to throw around words about crazy. My story is crazier than squirrel shit." I burst into laughter. It always shocked me when Yvette, with her cultured French accent, used crude Southern idioms. I guess she'd read them off the internet and inserted them into the conversation to tease me. Well, she'd effectively relieved the tension. "I'll go first," she said, "before my nerves give out. It'll be easier if you watch something first." Yvette set her laptop next to the bed. As we both got comfortable leaning against the headboard, she launched the video she had queued up. What I saw was a montage of surveillance tapes. They had been taken at the museum during the hostage-taking. Masked men, some with guns and others with machetes, stood guard over several civilians sitting in the galleries of the museum. As I watched what was happening, I realized that I had seen some of this footage before. It was another terrorist attack, this time carried out by Muslim extremists. It occurred around the same time as my own run-in with the terrorists. I remember it now. Several of the terrorists were wearing bomb vests. When the police stormed the building, they found that several local businessmen who were there on their lunch break had disarmed most of the terrorists, including those with bombs. I watched as the woman who was leading the main fight began to take out the hostage takers. This woman, dressed in a sensible business suit, tackled 5 terrorists. She took out the first 2 with a flurry of blows with her legs and arms and dealt with the rest with a gun she had taken off one of them. The press nicknamed her Fleur de Lis, after the DC Comics heroine. It had been several years since I'd last seen this footage, but this time I watched it with much more attention. After all, the woman on the screen was sitting right next to me. The playback ended, and there was silence for a few moments as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. This was one hell of a gigantic coincidence, and I wasn't sure I believed in such coincidences anymore. So, is there anything you want to say? Yvette held my hand as we watched. Her grip steadily tightened as my silence reached her. I was stunned, but Yvette couldn't understand why. Maybe she had been hurt before by men who were startled or intimidated. I raised my hand in a calming gesture. Wait here a minute, babe. I need to get something and then we can talk. I stood up and walked over to the closet. I pulled back a board in the floor, revealing a small safe that Yvette didn't know about. Inside were some papers, a flash drive, and an iPad. I took the tablet and carried it to the bed, plugged it in, and turned it on. Here, I said, there's something here you need to see. I sat down next to her again and played her the last 10 minutes of the North Korean's video, ending it with the triumphant introduction of yours truly. My part was over in less than 2 minutes, but the rest of the time was spent figuring out exactly what was going on. By the end of it, Yvette was squeezing my hand so tightly, I was afraid I was going to lose circulation in my hand. Sam, when did this happen? A few years ago. I didn't make the news like you did. There was a terrorist attack, but it was greatly downplayed and my identity was left out of the picture. You should be grateful for that. I was pretty famous for a while, but immediately I started receiving death threats, with the number of refugees from the Middle East pouring into Europe and my fame in the world. I got tired of feeling safe, so I changed my name and moved here. I hugged her. I was given some good advice about it, and I was happy to remain anonymous. I can't believe I didn't recognize you. The 2 attacks happened around the same time. I remember being very interested in your story because it was somewhat similar to my own. Hey, you changed your hair. Damn. That red looked really good on you. I'm sorry, honey. It was just too conspicuous. Maybe I'll let them grow back. You said you've been following my media coverage, so does that mean your attack came first? I can't say for sure. The weeks immediately following it were pretty hectic. I hardly had time to think about the holiday. A holiday? What holiday? Asked Yvette. National Tapioca Pudding Day, of course. To think that terrorists are trying to desecrate this day of days, chuckled I. I looked at Julie to see if she was amused, but she had gone white as a bone. July 15th? She wheezed. Are you saying that the attack on you happened on July 15th? I was confused by her sudden assertion. Yes? How do you know that? I didn't know that America, much less France, celebrated Tapioca Pudding Day at all. I looked it up, said Yvette. The attack on the Louvre. It happened on July 15th, 2016. Now we were both as pale as ghosts. It couldn't be. Really? On the same day? Yvette turned to me. Sam, have you ever had déjà vu? But that's another story. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this story, the link will be in the comments or in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.